The pregnancy test hit the boardroom table with a sound that shattered everything. Victoria Lane, senior partner, untouchable executive, the woman who never flinched, stood across from Daniel Harper, the single father she'd just fired. But the test between them told a different story. One night, one blizzard, one mistake that would cost them everything. "It's yours," she said, her voice steady even as the walls closed in. Daniel's world tilted. His daughter, his career, his future, all hanging by a thread. And somewhere in the building, someone was already taking photos. If you're watching, drop a comment with your city below. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stick around until the end. You won't believe what happens next. The architecture firm of Morrison & Associates occupied floors 32 through 35 of the Sentinel Tower in downtown Chicago, a glass monument to ambition where every surface reflected something: success, scrutiny, or the carefully managed distance between those who commanded and those who created. Daniel Harper had learned to navigate these reflections carefully. At 34, he'd mastered the art of being essential without being noticed, of delivering brilliant designs while keeping his head down. His daughter fed, and his past, the bankruptcy, the divorce, the year they'd lived in his car, locked away where it couldn't damage the fragile stability he'd rebuilt brick by brick. This particular Monday morning, the reflections felt sharper than usual. "Harper, conference room 3, 5 minutes." The voice belonged to Marcus Webb, the firm's operations director, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes and whose efficiency bordered on cruelty. He didn't wait for Daniel's response, just continued past his desk, trailing the scent of expensive cologne and implied urgency. Daniel saved his work, a residential complex that had consumed his last 3 weeks, and straightened his tie. 5 minutes was Marcus speak for immediately, and at Morrison & Associates, you didn't keep management waiting. The 27th floor felt different from the design floors below. Thicker carpet, quieter air, the kind of space where careers were built or demolished with equal precision. Conference room 3 was small, intimate, designed for conversations that required discretion. Through the glass wall, Daniel could see Marcus waiting, along with Jennifer Corso from HR, a woman whose presence at any meeting meant documentation, policy, and rarely anything good. And Victoria Lane. His stomach dropped. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. She wore charcoal gray, always gray or navy, never anything that suggested softness, and her dark hair was pulled back in a way that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. At 41, she'd been with Morrison for 15 years, climbing from junior architect to senior partner through a combination of brilliance, ruthlessness, and an ability to outwork everyone in the building. She was also, as of 3 weeks ago, carrying Daniel's child. He stepped into the room. The door clicked shut with the finality of a trap springing closed. "Daniel, sit down." Marcus gestured to the chair across from Victoria. Not beside her, across. The geography of the room told its own story. Daniel sat. His hands found the arms of the chair, steady, controlled. Whatever this was, his daughter needed him to handle it with the same calm competence he brought to everything else. Grocery shopping, homework help, navigating the minefield of single parenthood in a world that assumed 2 parents was the minimum requirement. "We'll get straight to the point," Jennifer said, opening a folder with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "The firm has received information regarding a personal relationship between yourself and Ms. Lane." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Daniel's eyes flicked to Victoria. She was looking at a point somewhere past his shoulder, her face a mask of professional detachment. But her right hand rested on the table, and her thumb was moving in tiny circles against her index finger, a tell he'd learned 3 weeks ago during the hours they'd spent stranded together when her armor had briefly slipped. "Company policy is explicit," Marcus continued, his tone carrying the weight of inevitability. "Romantic or sexual relationships between senior partners and their direct reports create liability, conflict of interest, and exposure the firm cannot accept." "We didn't," Daniel started, but Jennifer cut him off with a raised hand. "We have photographs, Mr. Harper." From the Reynolds donor retreat. The blizzard. She slid 3 printed images across the table. These were submitted anonymously to HR this morning. Daniel looked down at the evidence of his own life coming apart. The first photo showed a cabin interior, firelight dancing across walls. Victoria's hand on his shoulder, his head tilted toward her, the kind of proximity that couldn't be explained away as professional collaboration. The second was worse. The same cabin, later. The camera angle suggested it had been taken through a window, catching them in a moment of vulnerability that made Daniel's chest tighten with violation. The third photograph was from last Thursday, the medical clinic on Ashland Avenue. Victoria's hand wrapped around his wrist as they sat in the waiting room, her fingers white with pressure. His face turned toward her with an expression that betrayed everything. "Where did you get these?" Daniel's voice came out rougher than he intended. "That's not your concern," Marcus said. "What matters is that the firm's integrity has been compromised. We're implementing immediate remedial action." Victoria spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the cold precision that had made her legendary in client negotiations. Remedial action, that's an interesting euphemism for destroying a man's career. "Victoria," Jennifer began, but Victoria's gaze cut through her. "Let me save us all some time. Yes, Daniel and I were involved. Once, under circumstances beyond our control during the Reynolds retreat. The firm sent us into a blizzard together, stranded us in a cabin with inadequate heating, and now you're penalizing us for surviving it." "That's not," Marcus started, but Victoria wasn't finished. "I'm pregnant. The child is Daniel's. And before you start calculating liability, I'll remind you that I've brought this firm $62 million in revenue over the last 3 years, and I have 18 active clients who work with Morrison specifically because they work with me." The silence that followed was profound. Jennifer recovered first. "Ms. Lane, this isn't about your value to the firm. It's about policy, about precedent. If we make exceptions—" "You make exceptions constantly," Victoria interrupted. "James Morrison's nephew works here despite failing to meet basic qualifications. Rachel Saunders dated Tom Chen for 6 months before you bothered to address it, and only then because their breakup became public. But when it's me, when it's a single father who's delivered exceptional work for 4 years, suddenly policy is sacred." Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping into a register that suggested negotiation was over. "Victoria, you're too smart to make this about discrimination. The power differential between you and Harper is absolute. He reports to you. You control his projects, his promotions, his entire professional future. The firm cannot allow that dynamic to be compromised by a personal relationship." "Then transfer him," Victoria said immediately. "Move him to Thompson's team, or Garcia's. Remove me from his reporting chain entirely." "It's not that simple." "It absolutely is, unless this isn't actually about policy, unless this is about something else." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Daniel watched the exchange with growing certainty that he was a pawn in a much larger game. The photos, the timing, the precision of the attack. This wasn't random enforcement of company policy. This was strategic. "Who submitted the photographs?" he asked quietly. Jennifer's hesitation was answer enough. "I'd like to see the metadata," Victoria said, her tone shifting into something sharper. "The EXIF data, timestamps, device information. Since we're being thorough about policy, let's be thorough about how this information was obtained." "That's not necessary," Marcus began. "It absolutely is. Because if someone from this firm was surveilling employees during personal medical appointments, we're discussing a much more serious policy violation than consensual adult behavior." Daniel saw it then. The crack in Marcus's composure, the brief glance toward the door, the subtle shift in posture that suggested he knew exactly where this was heading and didn't like it. "The source is confidential," Marcus said finally. "HR has an obligation to protect whistleblowers." "Whistleblowers expose wrongdoing," Victoria countered. "What wrong was exposed here? That 2 adults were photographed at a medical clinic? That's not whistleblowing, that's stalking." Jennifer closed her folder with a sound like a judge's gavel. "Regardless of the source, the facts are clear. A senior partner and a direct report engaged in a relationship that violates firm policy. The appropriate response is separation of employment for the subordinate employee." The words landed like a physical blow. Daniel felt his carefully constructed life, the apartment lease he could barely afford, the daycare deposit, the careful budget that left exactly $73 for emergencies, begin to crumble. Separation of employment, he repeated, tasting each word. You're firing me. We're offering a severance package, Jennifer said, sliding another folder across the table. 3 months salary, continuation of health benefits through the end of the quarter, and a neutral reference. It's generous considering the circumstances. Daniel opened the folder. The numbers blurred. 3 months salary sounded substantial until you divided it by rent, food, daycare, the electric bill, the car payment, the debt from the bankruptcy that still followed him like a shadow. Sign the separation agreement, and this can be handled quietly, Marcus added. No contest, no drama. You'll land on your feet, Harper. You're talented. Talented. As if talent paid bills. As if talent kept his daughter fed when the world decided you were expendable. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against polished wood. This is absurd. You're terminating one of your best designers because of my personal life? We're protecting the firm, Marcus said, standing as well, matching her energy. And frankly, Victoria, you're too close to this to see clearly. The optics alone, a senior partner impregnated by her subordinate, it's a liability we cannot accept. Then accept my resignation instead. The room went silent. Daniel's head snapped up. Victoria was looking directly at Marcus now, her expression carved from stone, but her eyes carried the weight of a decision that was costing her everything. Victoria, don't be rash, Jennifer started. I'm not being rash. I'm being clear. You want to protect the firm's reputation? Fine. I'll remove the conflict, reinstate Daniel, transfer him to another team, and I'll submit my resignation effective immediately. You can't be serious, Marcus said, but his voice carried uncertainty now. I've never been more serious. I have 6 months of pregnancy ahead of me, and I'm not spending it working for a company that treats its employees like liabilities the moment they become inconvenient. Daniel stays. I go. Daniel found his voice, rough and urgent. Victoria, stop. You don't have to do this. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a moment the mask slipped. He saw fear there, carefully controlled but present. Fear of the unknown, of the life she was about to step into without the armor of her title, her corner office, the power she'd spent 15 years accumulating. But beneath the fear was something else, something fierce and protective and utterly immovable. Yes, she said quietly. I do. Marcus recovered quickly, his professional mask sliding back into place. Victoria, let's not make decisions in the heat of emotion. Take the rest of the day. Think about what you're suggesting. We can reconvene tomorrow. There's nothing to reconvene about. My resignation will be on your desk within the hour. Daniel's reinstatement will be processed immediately, or I go public with every detail of this meeting, including how this firm handles employee privacy and medical information. She picked up her phone, her bag, and walked toward the door with the controlled grace of someone who knew exactly how to exit a battlefield. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at Daniel. You're a good father, she said. Don't let them make you forget that. Then she was gone, leaving Daniel sitting across from two people who suddenly looked uncertain about the game they'd been playing. Marcus cleared his throat. Harper, the offer stands. Sign the separation agreement and we can all move forward. Daniel looked down at the papers, at the numbers that represented the price of his silence, his complicity, his willingness to be erased. He thought about his daughter, Emma, who was 6 years old and still believed her father could fix anything, who drew pictures of them in a house with a yard, who asked why they moved so much, who deserved better than watching her father surrender to people who saw him as collateral damage. He thought about Victoria, who just walked away from 15 years of career building to protect someone she barely knew. Someone who'd been nothing but a problem from the moment that pregnancy test appeared. He thought about the man he'd been before the bankruptcy, before the divorce, the man who believed integrity meant something, who thought doing good work and keeping your head down was enough. That man had been wrong, but maybe he'd been wrong about what mattered. Daniel stood up, leaving the papers unsigned on the table. Keep your severance package, he said. I'm not signing anything until I understand who took those photographs and why this firm thinks stalking employees is acceptable whistleblowing. Jennifer's professional composure cracked slightly. Mr. Harper, you're not in a position to make demands. I'm in exactly that position. Because if Victoria Lane can walk away from a senior partnership to protect me, The least I can do is refuse to make it easy for whoever's orchestrating this. Marcus's face hardened. You're making a mistake. Probably. I've made plenty of those, but I'm done making them quietly. Daniel walked out of conference room 3 with no job, no severance, and no idea what happened next. But for the first time in years, the reflection he caught in the glass walls looked like someone he might recognize. Someone who'd stopped running from consequences and started walking toward them with eyes open. The design floor felt different as he crossed it. People looked up from their desks, conversation dying in his wake. They knew. Of course they knew. In a firm this size, secrets lasted about as long as ice in summer. His desk held 4 years of work. Sketches, models, the small photograph of Emma that he'd taken last year at the zoo, her smile gap-toothed and perfect. He began packing methodically, sliding files into his messenger bag, wrapping the photograph in a cloth to protect it. Is it true? Daniel looked up. Sarah Chen, a junior designer who sat 3 desks over, was watching him with the kind of careful sympathy that suggested she'd heard everything and believed the worst. Is what true? He asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. That you and Victoria Lane, she trailed off, glancing around to see who else was listening. It's complicated, Daniel said, which was the most honest answer he could give. They're saying you stalked her, that you took advantage. They're wrong. Sarah's eyes narrowed. But there's a baby. Yes, there's a baby, and that's all I'm saying about it. He zipped his bag closed, slid his arms through the straps, and took one last look at the desk he'd occupied for 4 years. The space where he'd designed buildings that would stand long after he was forgotten, where he'd built a fragile sense of purpose between dropping Emma at school and picking her up again. The elevator ride down felt like descent into darkness. The lobby of Morrison and Associates was all marble and glass, designed to intimidate clients and remind employees of their place in the hierarchy. Daniel was halfway across it when he heard his name. Harper, wait. He turned. Ethan Ross stood near the reception desk, perfectly dressed in a suit that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, his expression carrying the kind of professional concern that felt rehearsed. Ethan was a vice president, one of the rising stars Marcus was grooming for partnership. He'd been at the Reynolds donor retreat, one of a dozen senior staff who'd endured the blizzard in varying degrees of comfort and frustration. Ethan, Daniel said neutrally, I heard what happened upstairs. I'm sorry, man. That's rough. Daniel studied him, looking for the crack in the performance, the tell that would reveal what Ethan really wanted. They'd never been friends, different levels, different circles, but they'd worked together on the Reynolds project, shared complaints about Marcus's micromanagement, passed time during the storm talking about architecture and ambition. Word travels fast, Daniel said carefully. This place is a fishbowl, you know that. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice to the register of confidential sympathy. Look, I don't know what really happened between you and Victoria, and frankly it's none of my business, but if you need a reference, someone to vouch for your work, I'd be happy to make some calls. The offer was smooth, practiced, the kind of generosity that cost nothing and purchased goodwill. That's kind of you, Daniel said, meaning none of it. We have to look out for each other, right? This firm, it can be brutal, especially when you're caught in the crossfire of someone else's choices. There it was. The subtle implication that Victoria was the problem, the one whose choices had damaged Daniel's innocent career. Victoria didn't make choices for me, Daniel said. We both made decisions. Together. Ethan's smile didn't falter. Of course. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. I just meant the power differential. It puts you in an impossible position. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. The phrasing was too precise, too aligned with the language Jennifer had used upstairs. Power differential, liability, impossible position. How did you know I was being let go? Daniel asked. It only happened 20 minutes ago. Ethan's hesitation was brief but telling. Marcus mentioned it, in passing. Marcus told you in passing that I was terminated for a relationship with a senior partner? That seems like a pretty significant breach of confidentiality. We're all on the same team, Harper. No, Daniel interrupted. We're not. Because someone on your team has been taking photographs of me in Victoria. Someone thought it was appropriate to stake out a medical clinic and document a private moment. And now you're standing here offering sympathy while already knowing details that should be confidential. Ethan's professional mask slipped just for a second, revealing something sharper underneath. You're upset. I understand, but you're pointing fingers in the wrong direction. Am I? Victoria Lane is brilliant, I'll give her that. But she's also ruthless. She destroys careers when they get in her way. Ask Richard Morrison. Ask half the people who used to work here. Maybe she saw something she wanted in you, and now you're dealing with the consequences. Daniel stepped closer, closing the distance until he could see the calculation in Ethan's eyes, the careful strategy behind every word. You're wrong about her, Daniel said quietly. And if you're the one who took those photographs, you're about to learn exactly how wrong. He walked away before Ethan could respond, pushed through the glass doors into Chicago morning, where the air was cold and clean and free of the suffocating politics he'd just left behind. His phone buzzed as he hit the sidewalk. Emma's school, probably calling to confirm pickup arrangements. But when he checked the screen, the message was from an unknown number. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Take the severance. Move on. Some fights aren't worth having. Daniel stared at the words, then deleted the message and blocked the number. Some fights weren't worth having, but this one was. Because somewhere in the architecture of this disaster was his daughter's future, a woman who'd sacrificed everything to protect him, and a truth that someone very badly wanted to stay buried. The train ride home gave him 40 minutes to think, to plan, to figure out how to explain to Emma why Daddy's schedule was suddenly very different. She'd understand. She always did, with the resilience of a child who'd learned too young that life didn't follow neat patterns. His apartment was quiet when he arrived, the kind of silence that felt heavy with possibility. He set his messenger bag down, started coffee, and did what he always did when the world shifted under his feet. He called his daughter's godmother. Rachel, it's Daniel. I need a favor. Rachel Martinez had been Daniel's lifeline since the divorce. The kind of friend who showed up with groceries when his bank account hit zero, and who took Emma for weekends when the weight of single parenthood threatened to crush him. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you didn't actually sleep with your boss, she said, without preamble. Daniel closed his eyes. How did you already know? LinkedIn is on fire. Someone posted that Victoria Lane resigned this morning, and the comments section turned into a soap opera. Your name came up about 6 times. She paused. Danny, what the hell happened? He told her everything. The retreat, the blizzard, the cabin where the heating had failed, and hypothermia had been a real possibility. The way Victoria had kept him talking, kept him conscious, the warmth of another body, the only thing between him and genuine danger. The morning after, when they'd both pretended it hadn't happened, had gone back to their professional roles like nothing had shifted. And then the pregnancy test, 3 weeks later, sitting on Victoria's kitchen counter like evidence at a crime scene. Rachel listened without interruption, which was how Daniel knew she understood the gravity of what he was describing. So she quit to protect you, Rachel said finally, and you walked out without signing their hush money agreement. Yes. You're broke, Danny. You have maybe 8 weeks of savings, and that's if Emma doesn't need new shoes or medicine or any of the 1,000 things kids need. You just turned down 3 months' salary because of pride? Not pride, principle. Principle doesn't pay rent. I know. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter, the same counter where he'd taught Emma to crack eggs, where they'd built gingerbread houses last December with frosting everywhere. But someone set us up, Rachel. Someone took those photographs deliberately, timed them perfectly, and submitted them to HR with enough precision to destroy both our careers. If I take that severance, I'm accepting that I deserved what happened, that Victoria deserved it. Maybe she does, Rachel said carefully. She's your boss, Danny, was your boss. The power dynamic, don't. His voice came out sharper than intended. Don't reduce what happened to a power dynamic. We were 2 people stuck in an impossible situation. Yes, she's senior to me. Yes, it was complicated. But I'm not a victim, and I'm tired of people treating me like one. Rachel sighed, the sound carrying years of friendship and frustration. Okay. So what's your plan? Besides unemployment and righteous anger? I'm going to figure out who took those photographs and why. That's not a plan. That's a vendetta. Maybe, but it's the only move I have. They talked for another 20 minutes, Rachel eventually agreeing to pick up Emma from school and keep her overnight while Daniel figured out his next steps. When he hung up, the apartment felt emptier than usual, echoing with the absence of the life he'd been building. His laptop sat on the kitchen table, patient and waiting. Daniel opened it, pulled up the photographs HR had shown him. The images burned into his memory with perfect clarity. The first shot, from inside the cabin. The angle suggested someone standing near the window, looking in. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., the night of the blizzard. Daniel remembered that moment. Victoria's hand on his shoulder, steadying him as another wave of shaking hit, his body temperature still dangerously low despite the fire they'd built. The second photograph was from later, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. The angle was similar but closer, as if the photographer had moved nearer to the window. Victoria's jacket draped over both of them, her face turned toward his, the kind of proximity that came from sharing body heat in survival situations but looked intimate through a camera lens. The third photograph, the clinic, was different. Taken from across the waiting room, partially obscured by a magazine rack. Someone had been inside the building, close enough to capture Victoria's hand on his wrist, close enough to see the fear she'd been trying to hide. Daniel zoomed in on each image, looking for details he'd missed in the shock of the conference room. The cabin photos showed snow on the window frame, heavy accumulation that matched the blizzard's intensity. But there were no footprints visible in the frame, no sign of someone standing outside in those conditions, which meant the photographer had been close to the building, probably in another cabin. The Reynolds estate had a dozen guest houses scattered across the property, most of them occupied during the donor retreat. Daniel pulled up the attendance list from his email archives, scanning names. 43 people had been stranded at the Reynolds estate that weekend. Senior staff, major donors, their partners, all of them trapped by a storm that had shut down roads and knocked out power across 3 counties. He started cross-referencing names with faces, memories of that chaotic weekend. Most people had stayed in the main house, clustering near the generator-powered common areas, but some, the more senior attendees, had been assigned private cabins. Ethan Ross had been in cabin 7, directly across from the cabin where Daniel and Victoria had sheltered. Daniel sat back, the pieces sliding into alignment with the sick clarity of a puzzle he didn't want to solve. Ethan had been in position to take those photographs. Ethan had somehow known about the clinic appointment. And Ethan had been waiting in the lobby this morning with rehearsed sympathy and carefully planted insinuations about Victoria's ruthlessness. But why? What did Ethan gain from destroying Victoria's career? The answer came like ice water. Partnership. Morrison and Associates had 3 senior partners, James Morrison, the founder, Victoria Lane, and Thomas Garcia. The firm's succession plan was common knowledge. When Morrison retired in 18 months, the remaining partners would split his equity and voting rights, unless the partnership structure changed before then. If Victoria resigned, her partnership share reverted to the firm, and Ethan, as Marcus's protege, was the obvious candidate to fill that vacant seat. Eliminate Victoria, claim her partnership, and position himself as Marcus's successor when the generational transition happened. Daniel's phone rang, interrupting the dark trajectory of his thoughts. Unknown number, but he answered anyway. Mr. Harper? A woman's voice, professional and clipped. This is Amanda Reeves from the Chicago Tribune. I'm working on a story about workplace ethics at Morrison and Associates, and I'd like to get your perspective on your termination this morning. Daniel's stomach dropped. How did you get this number? We received an anonymous tip about your situation. A senior partner involved with a subordinate employee pregnancy retaliation. It's a significant story, Mr. Harper. I'd like to hear your side before we go to print. No comment. He ended the call, but his hands were shaking. Anonymous tip. The same phrase HR had used about the photographs. Someone was building a narrative, feeding it to the press, ensuring that even if Daniel fought back, the story would be framed in the most damaging possible way. His phone rang again immediately. Different number, same request. A blogger from a workplace ethics website. Then another call, this one from a legal podcast. The feeding frenzy had begun. Daniel silenced his phone and sat in the sudden quiet, trying to think through the panic. Going public meant exposure, scrutiny. Emma's life dragged into focus, but staying silent meant letting someone else control the story. A knock at the door made him jump. Through the peephole, he saw Victoria Lane standing in his hallway, still wearing the gray suit from this morning, but somehow looking smaller, more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. He opened the door. "Your building has terrible security," she said. "Someone just let me in without asking questions." "Most people in this neighborhood are friendly," Daniel replied, stepping aside to let her enter. Victoria walked into his apartment with the careful attention of someone cataloging details. The cramped kitchen, the secondhand furniture, Emma's artwork covering one entire wall in an explosion of color and imagination. Her gaze lingered on a photograph near the door. Daniel and Emma at the beach last summer, both of them sunburned and happy. "You have a beautiful daughter," Victoria said quietly. "Thank you." Daniel closed the door, suddenly aware of how small his world must seem to someone accustomed to corner offices and executive privileges. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine." She turned to face him, and the mask she'd worn in the conference room had cracked completely. "I shouldn't have come here. It's probably a terrible idea, but I needed to make sure you understood. What I did this morning wasn't martyrdom. It was strategy." Daniel gestured to the couch. They sat at opposite ends, the distance between them feeling simultaneously too much and not enough. "Strategy," he repeated. "Marcus wants me out. He's wanted me out since James Morrison announced his retirement timeline. I'm the only thing standing between Marcus and complete control of the firm's direction." Victoria's hands twisted together in her lap, the nervous gesture at odds with her controlled voice. "The photographs, the timing, the pressure to terminate you immediately, that wasn't about policy. It was about forcing me into an impossible position. Choose between your career and protecting me." "Yes. And if I'd chosen my career, if I'd let them fire you, I'd be complicit in their game. Marcus would have leverage, proof that I'd sacrifice ethics for ambition. But if I resigned," she smiled without humor. "I removed myself from the board before he could orchestrate my removal. I controlled the narrative." Daniel processed this, the conversation shifting from personal crisis to corporate chess. "So you quit to maintain power?" "I quit to maintain integrity. The power was already gone the moment those photographs appeared. Someone on the inside has been watching us, documenting us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Staying would have meant accepting surveillance and manipulation as the cost of my career. I'm not willing to pay that price." "Who took the photographs?" Victoria met his eyes. "I have a theory, but theories require proof, and right now we have neither." "Ethan Ross." Her expression shifted, surprise giving way to grim confirmation. "You figured it out." "Cabin 7. Direct line of sight to where we sheltered. He was positioned perfectly to take those shots during the blizzard." Daniel leaned forward, the pieces still assembling themselves. "But the clinic photograph, that's different. That means he was following us. Or following you." "I've been tracking Ethan's movements since the retreat," Victoria admitted. "He's been unusually interested in my schedule, my meetings, my personal appointments. 3 weeks ago, I noticed him in the parking garage when I left for the clinic. I thought it was coincidence. It wasn't." "No." Victoria's voice carried the weight of someone who'd made a career of reading people and had missed the threat standing closest. "Ethan wants my partnership. He's been positioning himself for months, building alliances with Marcus, undermining my client relationships, spreading rumors about my management style. The photographs were the final move, create a scandal significant enough to force my resignation. Except you resigned on your own terms, which is why I came here. Because Ethan's not done. He can't be. A resignation isn't enough. He needs me destroyed completely. My reputation so damaged that I can't come back, can't compete, can't interfere with his ascension." As if summoned by her words, Daniel's silenced phone lit up with another call. Chicago Tribune. He showed Victoria the screen. "They're already calling," he said. "Anonymous tips about workplace ethics, asking for my side of the story before they go to print." Victoria's jaw tightened. "He's feeding the narrative to the press, making sure even your side sounds like confirmation of wrongdoing." "So what do we do?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications that went far beyond corporate politics. We. As if they were a team now, bound by circumstances into something neither had chosen, but both were living. Victoria stood, pacing the small living room with the restless energy of someone accustomed to controlling situations and finding herself adrift. We need proof, documentation, something that ties Ethan directly to the photographs, to the press leaks, to the campaign against us. How do we get that? Carefully. She turned to face him. Ethan's smart, but he's also arrogant. He thinks he's already won. That arrogance creates openings. Daniel's mind was already working through possibilities, the same strategic thinking he applied to architectural problems. The clinic photograph. It's different from the cabin shots. Different camera, different angle, different context. If we can prove it came from Ethan's phone or camera, we need access to his devices, his email, his communications with Marcus and HR. That's illegal. So is stalking employees and photographing them at medical appointments. Victoria's voice carried an edge now, the ruthlessness that had made her legendary bleeding through the cracks. I'm not suggesting we break laws. I'm suggesting we find someone who understands digital forensics and corporate investigation. I know someone, Daniel said slowly. The idea forming felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. Rachel's brother. He works in cybersecurity, as consulting for law firms on discovery and digital evidence. If anyone can trace the origin of those photographs without crossing legal lines, it's him. Victoria nodded. Set up a meeting, tonight if possible. Every hour we wait gives Ethan more time to control the narrative. Daniel made the call. Rachel's brother Marcus, ironically sharing a name with their antagonist, agreed to meet them at his office in 2 hours. When Daniel hung up, Victoria was standing at Emma's art wall, studying a crayon drawing of their apartment building with a rainbow arching overhead. She's talented, Victoria said softly. She wants to be an architect, like her dad. You must be proud. Terrified, mostly, that I'll fail her, that she'll grow up watching me struggle and thinking that's just how life works. Victoria touched the drawing gently, her fingers barely making contact with the paper. My mother was a secretary at an architecture firm. That's how I fell in love with the work, watching her type reports about buildings that would outlast all of us. She died when I was 16. Lung cancer. No insurance, no safety net. I swore I'd never be that vulnerable. Daniel heard the confession beneath the words, the fear that drove her relentless climb, the armor she'd built against a world that punished weakness. And now? He asked. Now I'm pregnant, unemployed, and trusting a man I barely know to help me fight a battle I'm not sure we can win. She smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. So much for invulnerability. They stood in silence for a moment, two people who'd been strangers 6 weeks ago and were now bound by biology, circumstance, and the mutual recognition that they were both in far deeper than they'd ever intended. We should go, Daniel said finally. Traffic to Marcus's office will be terrible this time of day. The drive across Chicago gave them 40 minutes of forced proximity, the car's confined space making conversation feel both necessary and dangerous. Victoria sat in the passenger seat of Daniel's 9-year-old Honda, a vehicle so different from her leased BMW that the contrast felt symbolic. Tell me about Emma's mother, Victoria said as they merged onto the expressway. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That's a complicated question. Most important questions are. He took a breath, the story he rarely told spilling out in fragments. Sarah had been his college girlfriend, the kind of passionate relationship that felt like destiny until reality intervened. Emma had been unplanned, but wanted, a reason to build something permanent. They'd married young, bought a house they couldn't afford, believed love and determination were enough. The bankruptcy had come from medical bills. Emma had been born 2 months premature. The NICU costs astronomical, even with insurance. Sarah had wanted to declare bankruptcy immediately. Daniel had wanted to pay their debts, maintain their credit, prove they could handle adversity. The fighting had started small and grown until their home felt like a war zone. Sarah had left when Emma was 3, moved to Portland with a new partner, sent cards on birthdays but rarely called. The divorce had been ugly, contested, expensive. Daniel had won primary custody because Sarah hadn't wanted to fight for it. which somehow made it worse. She sees Emma twice a year now, Daniel said, the words tasting like failure. Christmas and summer, sends child support that covers maybe a quarter of what Emma actually costs. And Emma asks why mommy doesn't call more, and I don't have a good answer. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. And now you're having another child with someone you barely know. That must be terrifying. Yes. I'm terrified too, she admitted. I'm 41. I never wanted children. I structured my entire life to avoid this exact situation. And now, she placed a hand on her stomach, the gesture unconscious. Now I have no idea what I'm doing. That makes two of us. They arrived at Marcus Chen's office in a converted warehouse in the West Loop, the kind of industrial chic space that housed startups and tech consultants. Marcus himself was younger than Daniel expected, maybe 30, with the focused intensity of someone who spent most of their life staring at screens. He listened to their story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a tablet, his expression giving nothing away. You're asking me to trace the origin of photographs that were submitted to your HR department, Marcus said when they finished. Photographs that may have been taken with intent to document a relationship in violation of company policy. Photographs that were taken through surveillance and stalking, Victoria corrected. One set through a window during a blizzard, another in a medical clinic waiting room. That's not whistleblowing, that's a crime. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, but here's the problem. If these photographs were submitted anonymously to HR, they've likely been scrubbed of metadata, especially if the person who submitted them has any technical sophistication. EXIF data can be stripped in seconds. Device fingerprints can be masked. If this Ethan Ross is as smart as you think, he won't have left an obvious trail. But there's always a trail, Daniel said. You told me that once, when you were helping Rachel with her identity theft case. You said people make mistakes, get overconfident, leave breadcrumbs. True, but finding those breadcrumbs requires access. Do you have copies of the original photograph files? The email they were sent in? Any communication between the anonymous tipster and HR? Victoria shook her head. HR wouldn't share that information. Confidentiality. Then we need a different approach. Marcus leaned back in his chair, thinking. The photographs tell a story. 3 separate incidents, all documented with precision. That suggests planning, patience, specific intent. If Ethan Ross took these photographs, he had to store them somewhere. Phone, computer, cloud storage. Those storage points leave traces. Can you access his devices? Daniel asked. Not legally, not without a warrant or his consent, neither of which we're getting. Marcus drummed his fingers on the desk. But I can do something else. I can analyze the photographs themselves. Compression artifacts, color profiles, lens characteristics. Every camera leaves a signature. If we can identify the specific device used and then demonstrate that Ethan Ross had access to that device, we have circumstantial evidence. How long will that take? Victoria asked. 48 hours, maybe less if I can pull in a favor from a colleague who specializes in image forensics. Marcus looked between them. But I need to be clear, even if I find evidence that points to Ethan, it won't be enough for criminal prosecution. Stalking laws require proof of intent to harass or intimidate. You'd need to demonstrate a pattern of behavior, not just isolated incidents. What about civil action? Victoria asked. Invasion of privacy? Intentional infliction of emotional distress? Possibly, but civil suits are expensive and public. Everything becomes part of the record. Your pregnancy, your relationship, the circumstances at the retreat, all of it available for discovery and media consumption. Marcus's expression softened slightly. I'm not saying don't pursue it. I'm saying understand what you're signing up for. They left Marcus's office with a plan that felt simultaneously concrete and impossible. Wait for the forensic analysis. Document any further contact from Ethan or the press. Avoid public statements until they understood the full scope of what they were facing. The drive back to Daniel's apartment was quieter, both of them processing the reality of what came next. You can still walk away from this, Victoria said as they pulled up outside his building. Take the severance, sign the agreement. Move on with your life and your daughter. Daniel turned off the engine, the car settling into silence. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. This is your life, your career, your choice. You quit your job to protect me. You're pregnant with my child. Your choices are my choices now, whether either of us planned it that way." Victoria looked at him, really looked, the way she had in the cabin during the blizzard when keeping him conscious had meant keeping him talking, connected, tethered to the present moment. "I meant what I said this morning," she told him. "You're a good father. Emma's lucky to have you. This baby—" She paused, the words still foreign in her mouth. "This baby will be lucky too." Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, the careful distance he'd been maintaining giving way to the terrifying reality that this wasn't strategy or survival anymore. This was two people standing at the edge of something vast and unknown, deciding whether to jump together or walk away. "We're going to figure this out," he said. "All of it. Ethan, the photographs, the baby, the complete disaster we've made of our lives. We'll figure it out." That's optimistic. That's fatherhood. You spend every day terrified you're going to fail, and then you wake up the next morning and try again anyway. Victoria smiled, genuine and unguarded. "I'm starting to understand why Emma drew you with a cape." "What?" She pointed to the drawing visible through his apartment window, one of Emma's favorites. Daniel standing in front of their building, a red cape flowing behind him, the word Dad spelled out in glitter letters. "She thinks you're a superhero," Victoria said softly. "She's 6. She doesn't know better yet. Or maybe she sees something you don't." They sat in the car for another moment, neither moving to leave, both reluctant to end the fragile connection they'd built. Finally, Victoria reached across and squeezed his hand once, quickly, before opening her door. "Thank you," she said, "for not running, for believing this is worth fighting for." Daniel watched her walk to her car, watched her drive away into Chicago evening, and felt the weight of what he'd just committed to settling onto his shoulders like a physical thing. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Emma was asking when Daddy was coming to get her, whether everything was okay, if they could have pancakes for dinner. Normal questions, normal requests, the kind of ordinary life that felt both precious and fragile. Daniel locked his car and headed upstairs to pack an overnight bag. He'd pick up Emma, make pancakes, read stories, tuck her into bed with promises that everything would be okay. And then tomorrow he'd wake up and continue fighting for the truth, for justice, for the messy, complicated future he'd accidentally built. Because that's what fathers did. They showed up. They fought. They protected the people who depended on them, even when the odds were terrible and the outcome uncertain. And sometimes, if they were very lucky, they found someone willing to fight alongside them. The pancakes burned while Daniel was distracted reading Emma's latest school project, a crayon essay titled "My Dad is Brave," that made his throat tight with emotions he couldn't name. He scraped the charred remains into the trash and started over. Emma perched on a kitchen stool providing commentary about how Auntie Rachel made them with chocolate chips. And why didn't Daddy ever remember the chocolate chips? "Because Daddy's brain is full of other things right now, sweetheart," he said, flipping a pancake that actually looked edible this time. "Like work stuff." Daniel hesitated, the spatula frozen mid-air. Emma was 6, but she understood more than people gave her credit for. She'd lived through the bankruptcy, the divorce, the year they'd moved 3 times chasing cheaper rent. She knew when her father was carrying weight. "Yeah, baby, work stuff. Are you in trouble?" He turned to look at her, this small, fierce person who'd inherited his dark hair and her mother's green eyes, who still believed her father could fix anything despite all the evidence to the contrary. "No, honey, I'm not in trouble. But some people at work made some unfair choices, and Daddy has to figure out how to make things right again." Emma considered this with the serious concentration she usually reserved for complex Lego instructions. "Like when Tommy said I cheated on the spelling test and I had to prove I studied really hard?" "Exactly like that." "Did you cheat?" "No." "Then you just have to show them you're honest. That's what Mrs. Patterson says. Honest people always win eventually." Daniel smiled despite the heaviness in his chest. Mrs. Patterson is a very wise woman. They ate pancakes at the small kitchen table, Emma chattering about her day while Daniel tried to focus on her words instead of the phone that kept buzzing with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. The Tribune had called 4 more times. So had 2 other reporters, a legal blogger, and someone claiming to be from a workplace advocacy organization. After Emma went to bed, 3 stories, 2 songs, and a lengthy negotiation about whether stuffed animals needed their own blankets, Daniel finally checked his voicemail. 16 messages. Most were reporters asking for comment on his termination following an inappropriate relationship with a superior. The language was almost identical across all of them, which told Daniel exactly how coordinated this campaign was. Someone had prepared a statement, distributed it to multiple outlets, ensured the narrative would be consistent and damaging. The last message was different. Mr. Harper, this is Jordan Mills from the Illinois Department of Labor. We've received a complaint regarding your termination from Morrison and Associates. The complaint alleges retaliation for reporting workplace safety violations. I'd like to schedule a time to discuss your case. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Daniel listened to the message 3 times, trying to parse what it meant. He hadn't filed a complaint with the Department of Labor. He'd barely had time to process his own termination, much less navigate bureaucratic reporting systems, which meant someone else had filed on his behalf. He called Victoria. She answered on the first ring, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd been awake for too long, thinking in circles. "Did you file a complaint with the Department of Labor?" he asked without preamble. "No, but I know who did. My attorney called an hour ago. Apparently, Morrison's HR department is now claiming your termination was related to safety violations you allegedly reported during the Reynolds retreat. They're trying to reframe the narrative before you can sue for wrongful termination." "That's insane. I never reported safety violations." "Doesn't matter. They're creating documentation that says you did. Backdating reports, manufacturing a paper trail. If they can prove your termination was related to legitimate safety concerns rather than our relationship, they insulate themselves from liability." Daniel sat down heavily on his couch, the implications cascading through his mind. "So they're framing me as a whistleblower who got fired for legitimate reasons, which makes me look vindictive when I claim the real reason was retaliation over our relationship." "Exactly. It's elegant, really. Marcus is covering all his angles." "What do we do?" "We respond to the Department of Labor honestly. We document that we never filed safety complaints during the retreat, and we wait for Marcus Chen's forensic analysis because right now that's the only evidence we have that might prove what actually happened." The next 48 hours moved with the strange duality of feeling both endless and too fast. Daniel filed for unemployment, updated his resume, reached out to contacts who might know about job openings. Rachel took Emma most afternoons, giving Daniel space to navigate the bureaucratic maze of sudden joblessness while fielding calls from reporters who'd somehow obtained his personal cell number. Marcus Chen called on the second evening with news delivered in his characteristic deadpan. "I've analyzed the photographs. The cabin shots were taken with an iPhone 14 Pro based on the lens characteristics and compression artifacts. The clinic photograph is different. Samsung Galaxy S23, different color profile, different metadata signature even after stripping." Daniel's pulse quickened. 2 different devices? "Yes," which suggests either 2 different photographers or one person using multiple devices to avoid creating a pattern. Marcus paused. "But here's where it gets interesting. The iPhone 14 Pro has a specific sensor defect that creates minor distortion in the upper right quadrant of images. It's subtle, usually invisible to the naked eye, but it shows up in detailed analysis. I cross-referenced this defect signature with publicly available images from Morrison and Associates social media accounts. And Ethan Ross posted photos from the Reynolds retreat on LinkedIn. 3 different shots, all showing the same distortion pattern. Same device." Daniel felt something cold and vindictive settle in his chest. That's proof. It's circumstantial evidence. Proof would require accessing Ethan's actual device and demonstrating the photographs exist in his photo library. But it's enough to establish a strong probability that the cabin photographs came from his phone. What about the clinic shot? The Samsung? That's trickier. I haven't found a public connection between Ethan and a Samsung device. But the clinic photograph has one other interesting characteristic. The EXIF data was stripped, but whoever stripped it missed the thumbnail cache. Buried in the file structure is a tiny preview image that still contains partial metadata, including a timestamp. When was it taken? Last Thursday, 9:47 a.m., which according to the clinic's appointment system, publicly visible on their website if you know where to look, corresponds exactly to the time you and Victoria were in the waiting room. Daniel processed this. So someone was there. in the clinic, waiting with a camera ready. More than that, the angle of the shot suggests it was taken from across the waiting room, partially obscured by the magazine rack. I pulled up the clinic's floor plan from their Google Maps listing. The only seating position that would allow that angle is the chair directly opposite the reception desk. Whoever took that photograph was sitting in that specific seat, waiting for you. The violation felt physical, a trespass that went beyond corporate politics into something darker and more personal. Someone had followed them to a medical appointment, had sat in that waiting room with a camera ready, had documented what should have been a private moment. "Can you prove who was sitting in that chair?" Daniel asked. "Not directly, but I did something else. I called the clinic pretending to be from an insurance verification service. Asked if they kept sign-in records from last Thursday. They do. And they were willing to confirm that 3 people signed in around the time of your appointment. You, Victoria, and a third party who signed in as Mark Stevens." Mark Stevens. Fake name. But here's the thing. The clinic requires photo ID for all visitors as part of their security protocol. They scan driver's licenses into their system. I can't access those scans without a warrant, but I did convince the receptionist to confirm that the ID was from Illinois. Daniel's mind raced ahead. If we can get that scan, if we can prove Mark Stevens was actually Ethan Ross, we'd have evidence of stalking, identity fraud, and invasion of privacy. Enough to file both civil and criminal charges. Marcus's voice carried a rare note of satisfaction. But getting that scan requires either a court order or the clinic voluntarily releasing it, and they're not going to do that without legal pressure. So we need a lawyer. You need a very good lawyer. Someone who specializes in privacy law and corporate misconduct, and you need money to pay them, which I'm guessing is in short supply right now. Daniel thought about his bank account, the number that seemed to shrink every time he looked at it. I'll figure something out. After hanging up with Marcus, Daniel called Victoria and relayed everything. She listened in silence, and when he finished, her voice carried a new edge of determination. "I know a lawyer, Christine Vega. She handled my contract negotiation when I made partner. She's expensive, but she's also brilliant, and she hates corporate bullying." Victoria paused. "I have savings, enough to retain her for at least the initial filing. We can—" "No." Daniel cut her off more sharply than intended. "You just quit your job. You're about to have a baby. I'm not taking your savings." "Daniel, this isn't charity. This is strategy. Ethan targeted both of us. Fighting him separately makes us vulnerable. Fighting together makes us dangerous. I can't let you pay for my legal defense. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to invest in our mutual survival. There's a difference." Her voice softened slightly. "Besides, I've been thinking, we're approaching this wrong. We're treating Ethan like he's the problem, when really he's just the symptom." "What do you mean?" "Marcus Webb orchestrated this. He needs Ethan in a partnership role to maintain control of the firm after James Morrison retires. The photographs, the press leaks, the manufactured safety violations, that level of coordination requires resources and institutional power. Ethan couldn't pull this off alone." Daniel hadn't considered this angle, had been so focused on Ethan as the immediate threat that he'd missed the larger architecture of the attack. "So we're not just fighting Ethan, we're fighting the firm's entire leadership structure." "Yes, which means we need to hit them where they're vulnerable. And the one thing Morrison and Associates values above everything else is reputation. They've built their brand on integrity, ethical design, social responsibility. If we can demonstrate that their leadership engaged in employee surveillance, privacy violations, and retaliation, we don't just win our case, we destroy their credibility." The idea was audacious and terrifying in equal measure. Going after the firm directly meant scorched earth, meant ensuring there was no path back to his old career, even if they won. But maybe that was the point. Maybe trying to preserve pieces of a life that had already been destroyed was the real mistake. "Set up the meeting with your lawyer," Daniel said. "Tomorrow, if she's available." Christine Vega's office occupied the 42nd floor of a building that made Morrison and Associates look modest by comparison. She met them in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, a view that probably cost more per month than Daniel's annual salary. Vega herself was in her 50s, sharp-featured and sharper dressed. with the kind of presence that suggested she'd won every argument she'd ever entered and expected this one to be no different. She listened to their story without interruption, occasionally making notes in handwriting too small for Daniel to read. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied them both with the clinical assessment of a surgeon planning an operation. "Your case has problems," she said bluntly. "You were in a relationship that violated company policy. That's documented. The power differential between you is significant and creates legitimate concerns about consent and professional ethics. Any jury will struggle with the optics of a senior partner involved with her subordinate." "But," Victoria started, but Vega held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Your case also has strengths. The surveillance is egregious. Following employees to medical appointments crosses every privacy line that exists. The manufactured safety violations show institutional bad faith. And if Marcus Chen's forensic analysis holds up to scrutiny, you have evidence that Ethan Ross specifically targeted you with premeditation and malice." She opened a laptop, typed something quickly, then turned the screen to face them. It showed a web page, the Morrison and Associates career section, highlighting their commitment to employee well-being and ethical workplace practices. "This firm markets itself on values," Vega said. "They're signatories to 3 different workplace ethics frameworks. They've won awards for corporate culture. They donate to women's leadership programs and sponsor diversity initiatives. All of that becomes ammunition if we can prove their actual practices are the opposite of their stated values." Daniel felt hope kindle for the first time in days. "So you'll take the case?" "I'll take the case, but we're not filing a simple wrongful termination suit. We're going after them for a pattern of misconduct, privacy violations, retaliation, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We'll seek both compensatory and punitive damages, and we'll do it publicly, with a press conference and full media coordination." "That's going to get ugly," Victoria said quietly. "Extremely. They'll attack your character. They'll dig into your personal lives looking for ammunition. They'll paint you as an executive who abused her power and a subordinate who got in over his head. Every detail of your relationship will be scrutinized and judged." Vega looked between them. "I need to know you're both prepared for that level of exposure." Daniel thought about Emma, about reporters calling his apartment, about her classmates' parents reading stories about her father's scandal. The price felt impossibly high. But then he thought about someone photographing him through a window, sitting in a medical clinic waiting room with a camera ready, manufacturing evidence to destroy his career. He thought about the message that sent to every other employee at Morrison and Associates, that privacy was conditional, that power could be wielded without consequence, that speaking up meant obliteration. "I'm prepared," he said. Victoria nodded. "So am I." Vega smiled, and it was the smile of a predator scenting blood. "Good. Because we're about to make Morrison and Associates very uncomfortable." The lawsuit was filed on a Friday morning, timed to hit the news cycle when reporters were hungry for weekend stories. Vega had prepared a comprehensive complaint, 47 pages documenting surveillance, privacy violations, retaliation, and a pattern of institutional misconduct designed to silence employees who threatened leadership interests. The press conference was held at Vega's office, Daniel and Victoria standing beside their attorney while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Vega handled the presentation with the precision of a military campaign. She outlined the facts dispassionately, showed the forensic evidence connecting the photographs to Ethan Ross, detailed the manufactured safety violations, and painted a picture of a firm whose stated values were pure marketing while their actual practices bordered on criminal. "My clients are here today not because they want attention, but because they want accountability," Vega said into the microphones. Morrison and Associates markets itself as an ethical leader. We intend to prove that leadership engaged in deliberate surveillance of employees, violated medical privacy, and retaliated against those who refused to be silenced. This lawsuit seeks not just compensation for damages, but fundamental change in how this firm treats its employees. Says, the questions came rapid fire. Was there a romantic relationship? Yes. Did that violate company policy? Yes. Then wasn't the termination justified? Vega didn't flinch. Company policy violations don't justify stalking. They don't justify following employees to medical appointments. They don't justify manufacturing false documentation to destroy someone's career. Morrison and Associates could have addressed a policy violation through standard HR processes. Instead, they chose a campaign of harassment and intimidation. That's what we're here to address. Daniel watched the reporters scribbling notes, saw their expressions shift as they processed the narrative Vega was constructing. This wasn't a simple story of workplace romance gone wrong. This was institutional abuse of power, privacy invasion, and the kind of corporate overreach that made good headlines. Afterward, in the relative quiet of Vega's conference room, they watched the news coverage roll in. The story was already spreading across legal blogs, workplace ethics sites, local news channels. Morrison and Associates' carefully curated reputation was taking hits from every direction. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Just saw the news. Are you insane? Also, I'm proud of you. Also, Emma wants to know if she's going to be on TV." He smiled despite everything. "Tell her no TV, and tell her daddy loves her." Victoria was at the window, staring out at the lake with an expression Daniel was starting to recognize. The look she got when she was running scenarios, calculating outcomes, preparing for the next move. "They're going to come back hard," she said without turning around. "Marcus isn't going to just absorb this. He'll hit us with everything he has." "I know. Your life is going to be in the news. Your divorce, your bankruptcy, every mistake you've ever made. They'll use it all." "I know," Daniel repeated. "But Emma's teacher already called Rachel asking if everything was okay. My landlord left a message saying he saw the news and wanted to check in. The exposure is already happening. At least this way we're controlling part of the narrative." Victoria finally turned to face him. "I'm sorry for all of this. You deserve better than getting caught in my professional civil war." "You think this is your fault?" "I know it is. If we hadn't, Daniel crossed the room to stand in front of her, close enough to see the fear she was trying to hide behind strategic thinking. "If we hadn't what? Survived a blizzard together? Made human decisions under impossible circumstances? Victoria, the only people at fault here are the ones who turned our lives into ammunition." She looked at him with something raw and unguarded. "I don't know how to do this. Any of this. Being vulnerable, asking for help, trusting someone else to have my back. I built my entire career on being untouchable, and now you're human. Welcome to the club. It's terrible and messy, and occasionally you make pancakes that burn while you're distracted reading your daughter's essay about how you're brave even though you feel like you're falling apart." Victoria's laugh was unexpected and genuine. "Is that what happened to breakfast the other morning? Emma ratted me out? She mentioned it when I called to check on you. She also said you let her have ice cream to make up for the burned pancakes, which apparently makes you the best dad in the world." Daniel felt his chest tighten with the impossible complexity of everything he was trying to hold together. "I'm trying. That's all I can do. Try and hope it's enough." "It is enough." Victoria's hand found his, squeezed once. "For what it's worth, I think Emma's right. You are the best dad." They stood like that for a moment, two people bound by circumstances into something that felt increasingly like partnership, like trust, like the foundation of something that might survive beyond the immediate crisis. Vega interrupted by clearing her throat from the doorway. "Sorry to break up the moment, but we have a problem. Morrison and Associates just filed a countersuit. They're claiming defamation, tortious interference, and breach of Victoria's employment contract. They're seeking $10 million in damages." The number hit like a physical blow. $10 million, Daniel repeated numbly. "For what?" "For the press conference, for the allegations of institutional misconduct, for what they're calling a coordinated attack on the firm's reputation designed to extract a settlement." Vega's expression was grim. "It's a SLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation, designed to intimidate us into backing down through sheer financial pressure." "Will it work?" Victoria asked, her voice steady despite everything. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Illinois has anti-SLAPP statutes. We can move to dismiss on the grounds that our lawsuit addresses matters of public concern. But in the meantime, this countersuit creates pressure. It's going to be expensive to fight, time-consuming, and it gives Morrison ammunition to claim you're the aggressors here." Daniel felt the walls closing in again, the brief moment of hope crushed under the weight of institutional power. 10 million. Even the suggestion of that kind of liability would destroy what little financial stability he had left. What do they want? He asked quietly. What would make them drop this? Vega looked at him with something like sympathy. They want you to go away quietly, withdraw the lawsuit, sign an NDA, accept that you violated policy and your termination was justified. Victoria would agree not to compete with the firm for 3 years and would publicly state her resignation was voluntary and unrelated to any misconduct. In exchange, they'd drop the countersuit and provide modest severance. How modest? $50,000 for you, nothing for Victoria since she resigned. Victoria laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. $50,000 in silence in exchange for admitting we're liars and abandoning any attempt at accountability. That's generous of them. It's calculated, Vega said. They know fighting this will cost you more than $50,000 in legal fees alone. They're betting you'll do the math and realize surrender is the only economically rational choice. Daniel looked at Victoria. She was staring at the skyline, her jaw set in that way that meant she'd already made her decision and was just waiting for the world to catch up. We're not surrendering, she said. Fight the countersuit. File the anti-SLAPP motion. Whatever it takes. Victoria, the legal fees alone, Daniel started, but she cut him off. I have assets. Retirement accounts, investments, the condo. I'll liquidate whatever we need to keep fighting. This isn't about money anymore. It's about whether people like Marcus and Ethan can destroy lives without consequences. Vega nodded slowly. Okay, but I need you both to understand what you're choosing. This fight could take years. It will consume your savings, your time, your energy. You'll be living under a microscope while the firm uses every resource they have to discredit you. And at the end of it, there's no guarantee we win. But if we do win, Daniel asked, if we win, Morrison and Associates faces institutional reform, significant financial penalties, and a permanent stain on their reputation. Ethan Ross potentially faces criminal charges for stalking and fraud. Marcus Webb's career is effectively over, and you both get vindication, compensation, and the satisfaction of proving that speaking truth to power actually matters. The stakes felt impossibly high, the outcome uncertain, the price of admission more than Daniel had ever imagined paying. But he thought about Emma's essay calling him brave, about Victoria walking away from 15 years of career to protect him, about the message their surrender would send to everyone watching. Let's fight, he said. Victoria's hand found his again, and this time she didn't let go. The fight began in earnest on a Monday morning 3 weeks later, when Christine Vega filed their anti-SLAPP motion in Cook County Circuit Court. Daniel sat in the gallery watching the proceedings, Victoria beside him, both of them dressed in the careful professional armor that court appearances demanded. Across the aisle, Morrison and Associates had brought an army. 5 attorneys in matching dark suits, Marcus Webb sitting behind them with the satisfied expression of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. The judge was Miriam Chen, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a reputation for impatience with corporate gamesmanship. She listened to both sides' arguments with an expression that gave away nothing, occasionally interrupting with questions sharp enough to make even the most prepared attorney stumble. Morrison's lead counsel, a man named Richard Pierce, who commanded fees that made Vega's rates look reasonable, argued that the lawsuit was a coordinated attack designed to extort settlement money through public embarrassment. He painted Daniel and Victoria as opportunistic conspirators who'd violated clear company policy and were now manufacturing a narrative of victimhood to avoid accountability. Your Honor, the defendants would have this court believe that enforcing basic workplace ethics constitutes persecution, Pierce said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd won more cases than he'd lost. But the facts are simple. Ms. Lane, as a senior partner, engaged in a relationship with her direct subordinate in clear violation of policy she herself had helped draft. When the firm appropriately addressed this violation, she resigned rather than face consequences. Now, rather than accept responsibility, she and Mr. Harper are pursuing a frivolous lawsuit designed solely to damage my client's reputation. Vega stood to respond, her smaller frame somehow commanding more presence than Pierce's corporate polish. Your Honor, opposing counsel would have you believe this case is about workplace romance. It's not. It's about a systematic campaign of surveillance, stalking, and retaliation. My clients aren't seeking to avoid accountability. They're seeking accountability from a firm that followed employees to medical appointments, photographed them through cabin windows, and manufactured false documentation to justify termination. These are matters of urgent public concern. The anti-SLAPP statute exists precisely to protect speech addressing institutional misconduct. The arguments continued for 90 minutes, legal precedent and statutory interpretation flying back and forth across the courtroom. Daniel tried to follow the technical language but found himself watching Judge Chen instead, looking for any sign of how she was leaning. Finally, she raised a hand for silence. I've heard enough. The court will take this matter under advisement and issue a ruling within 30 days. However, I will note for the record that the allegations in the underlying complaint, if proven true, would constitute serious violations of privacy law and potentially criminal conduct. This court does not take kindly to SLAPP suits designed to silence legitimate whistleblowing. Counsel for Morrison and Associates should keep that in mind. The gavel fell with a sound like punctuation. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed immediately. Vega handled them with practiced efficiency while Daniel and Victoria tried to reach their car through the chaos of questions and camera flashes. Mr. Harper, how does it feel to be sued for $10 million? Miss Lane, do you regret your relationship with your subordinate? Is it true you're pregnant? That last question stopped Victoria mid-stride. She turned to face the reporter, a young woman with a recorder thrust forward like a weapon. My medical information is private, Victoria said, her voice carrying the cold precision that had once terrified junior associates. The fact that you're asking about it demonstrates exactly the privacy violations we're fighting against. But the public has a right to know if the public has a right to accurate information about institutional misconduct. My pregnancy is not a matter of public concern. It's a personal medical condition that someone illegally obtained and distributed. If you publish speculation about my medical status, you'll be hearing from my attorney regarding invasion of privacy. The reporter stepped back, suddenly uncertain. Vega appeared at Victoria's elbow, guiding her away from the cameras with the efficiency of a Secret Service agent. In the car, finally alone, Victoria pressed her palms against her eyes and took a shaking breath. I'm sorry, Daniel said. I should have gotten you out of there faster. It's not your fault. I knew this was coming. The firm's going to leak every private detail they can find. My medical records, your financial history, anything that makes us look sympathetic becomes ammunition in their hands. She dropped her hands, and her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. I had a doctor's appointment last week. Routine ultrasound. When I left, there was a photographer in the parking lot. He got shots of me coming out of the obstetrics clinic. Daniel felt ice form in his chest. Did you report it? To who? The police? They can't do anything about someone taking photographs in a public parking lot. Vega's team? They documented it, but it's not illegal unless we can prove harassment or stalking intent. She laughed without humor. So I get to live with cameras following me to medical appointments while fighting a lawsuit about privacy invasion. The irony is almost funny. It's not funny, it's abuse. Yes, but it's also effective. They want me to feel exposed, vulnerable, hunted. They want me to break down publicly so they can point to my emotional instability as evidence I'm an unreliable witness. Daniel reached across the center console and took her hand, the gesture becoming familiar through repetition. You're the strongest person I've ever met. They're not going to break you. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because I've seen you walk away from 15 years of career to protect someone you barely knew. I've seen you stand in front of cameras and speak truth, even when it cost you everything. Whatever else happens, they can't take that away. Victoria squeezed his hand but didn't answer. And in the silence, Daniel heard all the fear she was too proud to speak aloud. Fear that they'd lose, that she'd exhaust her savings fighting a battle that couldn't be won, that she'd bring a child into a world where her name was synonymous with scandal and her career was ashes. The weeks that followed felt like living in a war zone where the attacks came from every direction at once. Morrison and Associates leaked carefully edited emails to friendly reporters, messages where Victoria had used harsh language with subordinates or made decisions that could be framed as callous. They found former employees willing to speak on record about her demanding management style, her reputation for destroying careers that got in her way. Daniel's bankruptcy records appeared on a legal gossip blog, complete with speculation about whether he'd targeted Victoria deliberately for financial security. His ex-wife gave an interview to a women's website, describing him as controlling and financially irresponsible, conveniently omitting the medical debt that had triggered their financial collapse. Emma started coming home from school with questions Daniel didn't know how to answer. "Melissa's mom said you got fired for doing something bad," she told him one afternoon, her small face serious in the way that meant she was trying to understand adult complications. "Did you?" They were in the apartment kitchen, Daniel attempting to make dinner while Emma did homework at the table. He set down the knife he'd been using to chop vegetables and crouched to her eye level. "I didn't do anything bad, sweetheart, but I did do something that my old company didn't like, and they decided I couldn't work there anymore." "What did you do? How did you explain adult relationships to a 6-year-old? How did you convey the complexity of situations where everyone made choices that seemed right at the time but created consequences no one anticipated?" "I became friends with someone at work," Daniel said carefully, "and the company has rules about certain kinds of friendships. When they found out, they said I broke the rules." "But you said you didn't do anything bad." Breaking a rule isn't always the same as doing something bad. Sometimes rules are there for good reasons. Sometimes they're not. The important thing is what happened after. Some people at my old company did things that really were bad. They followed me places I should have been private. They took pictures without asking. They told lies about me to make me look worse than I was. Emma processed this with the careful logic she applied to everything. Like when Tommy said I cheated, but I didn't? Exactly like that. "And you're trying to prove you didn't cheat?" "I'm trying to prove that what they did was worse than what I did, and that even when you break a rule, you don't deserve to be treated badly." She nodded slowly, then returned to her homework with the easy resilience of childhood. But Daniel saw the way she watched him more carefully now, saw the worry in her eyes when reporters called or when he spent hours on the phone with Vega's office. She was learning too young that the world could be cruel, that her father wasn't invincible, that sometimes the good guys didn't win just because they deserved to. The anti-SLAPP ruling came down on a Thursday afternoon. Judge Chen granted their motion, dismissing Morrison's countersuit with prejudice and ordering the firm to pay their legal fees. The opinion was scathing, 23 pages of judicial language that essentially called the countersuit exactly what it was, an attempt to silence legitimate complaints through financial intimidation. Vega called with the news while Daniel was picking Emma up from school. He pulled over on a side street, hands shaking as he absorbed what she was saying. "We won?" he asked, not quite believing it. "This round, yes. The countersuit is dead. They can't refile. And the fee award is substantial, $240,000 covering our costs to date. Judge Chen specifically noted that the underlying allegations in your complaint raise serious questions about institutional misconduct that warrant full litigation." "What does that mean for the main lawsuit?" "It means we move forward. Discovery starts next week. We'll be deposing witnesses, subpoenaing documents, building our case for trial. Morrison and Associates just lost their biggest leverage tool. Now they have to actually defend their actions." After hanging up, Daniel sat in the car for a long moment, watching Emma through the school fence as she played with friends on the playground. She was laughing at something another girl said, completely unaware that her father had just won a battle that might mean the difference between survival and destruction. He texted Victoria, "We won the anti-SLAPP motion, countersuit dismissed." Her response came immediately. "I know. Vega called. Meet me at my place tonight? We should talk about next steps." Daniel picked up Emma, took her for ice cream to celebrate nothing she understood but everything that mattered, and dropped her at Rachel's for the evening before driving to Victoria's condo in Lincoln Park. He'd been there once before, the night of the pregnancy test, but the space felt different now, less like enemy territory and more like the home of someone he was starting to know in fragments. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater that showed the first subtle signs of pregnancy, her hair down in a way he'd never seen during work hours. "Come in. I ordered Thai food. Hope you're hungry." The condo was immaculate in the way spaces are when someone spends 70 hours a week at the office and uses home mainly for sleep. Clean lines, minimal decoration, everything in shades of gray and white that matched her professional wardrobe. But there were details that suggested the person beneath the armor, a shelf of architecture books, photographs from projects she'd led, a single plant by the window that somehow hadn't died despite obvious neglect. They ate at her kitchen island, the conversation carefully avoiding the obvious topics. She asked about Emma, about whether school was getting harder with all the media attention. He asked about her doctor's appointments, whether everything was progressing normally with the pregnancy. Finally, over tea, Victoria set down her cup and met his eyes. "Vega wants to settle," she said. "Morrison's attorneys reached out this afternoon. Confidential mediation, neutral arbitrator. They're willing to negotiate now that the countersuit failed." "What are they offering?" She didn't say specifics, but reading between the lines, probably reinstatement for you with back pay and a promotion, substantial monetary settlement for both of us, agreement to reform their surveillance and privacy policies. In exchange for signing an NDA and agreeing not to pursue criminal charges against Ethan. Daniel turned his cup in his hands, the ceramic warm against his palms. "What do you want to do?" "I want to know what you want. This is your career, your future. I've already burned my bridges with Morrison, but you could go back. You could have stability again, a steady paycheck, health insurance for Emma." "Is that what you think I want? To go back to a firm that stalked us, that manufactured evidence against us, that treated us like collateral damage?" "I think you want what every parent wants, security for your child, and I think you're terrified of making the wrong choice because it doesn't just affect you anymore." Victoria's voice was gentle, understanding in a way that cut deeper than accusation. "There's no shame in that, Daniel. Taking a settlement doesn't make you weak or complicit. It makes you practical." "And what about accountability? What about making sure Ethan faces consequences for what he did?" "Ethan will face consequences either way. Even if we settle, the evidence we've compiled becomes part of the public record. The firm will have to address it internally. His career at Morrison is effectively over. But he won't face criminal charges. He'll just move to another firm and do this to someone else." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "You're right, and that bothers me more than I want to admit. I've spent my entire career believing the system worked if you just followed the rules, delivered excellent work, earned your place through merit. This whole experience has shown me how naive that was. The system protects power. It always has." "So we fight," Daniel said. "We take this to trial. We make them answer for everything publicly." "At what cost?" "Legal fees will consume whatever settlement we might win. The trial will take years. Your life, Emma's life, our child's future, all of it becomes public consumption. And at the end, there's no guarantee we win. Juries are unpredictable. Corporate defendants have resources to outlast almost anyone." "You're trying to talk me out of fighting. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're choosing. Because once we reject settlement, once we commit to trial, there's no walking it back. Morrison will come at us with everything. They'll try to destroy our credibility, our character, our ability to work in this industry ever again, and they might succeed." Daniel stood and walked to the window, looking out at Chicago lights spreading toward the lake. Somewhere in this city, Emma was safe at Rachel's house, doing homework or watching cartoons, trusting that her father would make choices that protected her future. Somewhere else, Ethan Ross was probably celebrating the anti-SLAPP dismissal as a temporary setback, already planning his next move. And here, in this expensive condo that smelled like takeout and Earl Grey tea, he and Victoria were deciding whether justice was worth the price it demanded. "I want to fight," Daniel said finally. "Not because I'm confident we'll win, not even because I'm sure it's the smart choice, but because Emma's watching how I handle this. She's learning from me what it means to face unfairness, to decide whether you surrender to power or stand up even when it's terrifying. I want her to see me stand." Victoria came to stand beside him at the window. "You know I'm with you, whatever you choose. Even if we lose everything?" "I've already lost everything that matters to me professionally. My partnership, my reputation, my carefully constructed career. What I have now is the chance to build something different, something more honest." She placed a hand on her stomach, the gesture becoming habitual. "This baby is going to grow up in a world where I either taught them that power can do whatever it wants, or that sometimes you fight even when it's hard. I'd prefer the second lesson." Daniel turned to face her fully, seeing her without the professional armor, without the defenses she'd built over 41 years of survival in environments that punished vulnerability. We're really doing this, he said. We really are. They called Vega together, putting her on speaker while she was apparently still at the office despite the late hour. Tell Morrison's attorneys we're rejecting settlement, Victoria said. We're proceeding to trial. Vega was silent for a moment. You're sure? Because once I communicate this, they're going to assume you're bluffing. They'll wait for you to reconsider, then they'll withdraw any offer when you come back to the table. This is a one-time decision. We're sure, Daniel confirmed. Okay then, I'll notify opposing counsel tomorrow morning. In the meantime, prepare yourselves. Discovery is going to be invasive. They'll subpoena everything: emails, text messages, financial records, medical history. Your entire lives become evidence. They'll depose friends, family, former colleagues. They'll look for any inconsistency, any statement that contradicts your narrative. We understand, Victoria said. I hope you do. Because I've been practicing law for 26 years, and I can count on one hand the number of clients willing to take on a firm like Morrison and Associates without blinking. You're either very brave or very foolish, possibly both. After Vega hung up, Daniel and Victoria sat in silence, the weight of their decision settling around them like weather. Stay tonight, Victoria said suddenly. It's late. Emma's at Rachel's. We could both use the company. Daniel hesitated, the invitation carrying implications he wasn't sure either of them was ready to navigate. But the thought of driving back to his empty apartment, of sitting alone with the enormity of what they'd just committed to, felt impossible. Okay, he said. She made up the guest room with the efficiency of someone unaccustomed to hosting overnight visitors, provided fresh towels and an extra blanket, apologized for not having spare toiletries. The domesticity of it felt surreal after weeks of legal strategy and corporate warfare. Daniel lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to Victoria move around her own room down the hall, and wondered how they'd gotten here. Two people who'd been virtual strangers 2 months ago, now bound together in a fight that would define both their futures. Partners by necessity, allies by choice, something more complicated than either label suggested. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma via Rachel's phone. Daddy, I drawed you a picture of us winning. Auntie Rachel says good luck tomorrow. I love you. The attached photo showed a crayon drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, the word winners spelled out in uneven letters across the top. Daniel smiled in the darkness and texted back. I love you too, sweetheart. See you tomorrow. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it the reality of their decision. Vega called at 8 to confirm she'd notified Morrison's counsel, who'd responded with what she described as predictable posturing and thinly veiled threats. They're demanding immediate depositions, Vega said, starting with both of you. Next week, if possible. They want to pin you down on the record before you have time to coordinate testimony. That's aggressive, Victoria observed. That's desperate. They thought the countersuit would force settlement. Now they're scrambling to regain control of the narrative. Let them be aggressive. We'll use their desperation against them. The depositions were scheduled for the following Tuesday and Wednesday, Daniel first, and then Victoria. The weekend between Vega's call and the depositions felt like living in suspended animation. Daniel tried to maintain normalcy for Emma's sake, playground visits, movie nights, homework help, but she sensed his distraction. Are you scared about the trial? She asked Saturday evening as he tucked her into bed. A little bit, yeah. Mrs. Patterson says being scared is okay. It means you care about something important. Mrs. Patterson is very wise. Emma was quiet for a moment, her small face serious in the nightlight's glow. Is Victoria nice? The question caught Daniel off guard. Yes, sweetheart. She's very nice. Why do you ask? Because Rachel said Victoria is helping you fight the bad people at your old job. And I wanted to know if she's nice, because if she's nice, then maybe she could come over for dinner sometime. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, the careful compartmentalization he'd been maintaining between his life with Emma and his life with Victoria suddenly feeling artificial and unsustainable. Would you like that? If Victoria came to dinner? Yeah, because if she's fighting with you, then she's kind of like family, right? And family has dinner together. The simple logic of childhood, reducing complex adult situations to their emotional core. Family was whoever stood beside you in the fight. I'll ask her, Daniel said. But you should know, Victoria's going to have a baby. A little brother or sister for you. Emma's eyes went wide. Really? When? In about 6 months. Is Victoria going to be my new mommy? Daniel struggled for the right words, the honest answer that didn't promise more than he could guarantee. It's complicated, baby. Victoria and I are friends. We're helping each other. And yes, she's going to have a baby that's your sibling. But what that looks like, how our families fit together, we're still figuring it out. Emma considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Okay, but can she still come to dinner? Because I want to meet her. I'll arrange it, Daniel promised. He texted Victoria after Emma fell asleep. Emma wants to meet you. Would you be willing to come to dinner this week? Fair warning, she has a lot of questions and zero filter. Victoria's response came 20 minutes later. I'd love to. Just tell me when. And Daniel, thank you for letting me be part of this. The deposition took place in a conference room at Morrison's attorney's offices, a space designed to intimidate with its mahogany table and leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling law books that probably nobody ever read. Richard Pierce led the questioning, 5 other Morrison attorneys arrayed beside him like a jury, while Vega sat next to Daniel and occasionally objected to form or relevance. Pierce was methodical and brutal, spending the first 3 hours establishing Daniel's financial situation, his bankruptcy, his desperation for stable employment. The implication was clear. Daniel had targeted Victoria deliberately, seeing in her both professional advancement and financial security. Isn't it true, Mr. Harper, that at the time of the Reynolds retreat you were 3 months behind on child support payments? I don't pay child support. My ex-wife pays me. But you were behind on credit card payments, correct? I was managing my debt responsibly. By which you mean you were paying minimum payments and accruing interest at 23% annually? Vega objected. Relevance? Goes to motive, Pierce said smoothly. Mr. Harper's financial desperation is relevant to whether he deliberately pursued a relationship with a senior partner who could provide professional and monetary advancement. The questioning continued in that vein for hours, each question designed to paint Daniel as calculating, desperate, willing to compromise ethics for advantage. Pierce produced emails Daniel had sent Victoria about projects, analyzing them for any hint of flirtation or manipulation. He asked about every conversation they'd had before the retreat, every interaction that could be reframed as pursuit rather than professional collaboration. When you arrived at the cabin during the blizzard, Miss Lane was already there, correct? Yes. And she was alone? Yes. Did you suggest sharing the cabin? The retreat coordinator assigned us both there when the other cabins lost power. We didn't choose to be together. But once you were together, you made the choice to stay rather than seeking other accommodations? Other accommodations where? There was a blizzard. The roads were closed. The main house was already overcrowded. The cabin had a working fireplace. It was the safest option. The safest option, I see. Pierce made a note, the gesture theatrical. And at what point during this safe arrangement did you decide to initiate sexual contact with your supervisor? Vega's objection was sharp and immediate. That's a mischaracterization of the testimony, and you know it. Sustained, said the court reporter managing the deposition, though her power to sustain objections was largely symbolic. Pierce rephrased. When did sexual contact first occur between you and Ms. Lane? Daniel forced himself to maintain eye contact, to answer with the clinical precision the question demanded. Late that night. We'd been talking for hours, trying to stay awake because of hypothermia risk. The conversation became personal. We both made a choice. Both made a choice. How noble. But Ms. Lane was your supervisor, correct? She controlled your assignments, your performance reviews, your entire professional future at Morrison and Associates. Yes. So when she initiated sexual contact, you felt you couldn't refuse without jeopardizing your career? She didn't initiate. I did. The admission hung in the air, months of careful avoidance crystallizing into truth. Daniel had been the one to close the distance first, to suggest through action what words couldn't safely articulate. Victoria had responded yes, but the first move had been his. Pierce smiled, and it was the smile of a hunter who'd just watched his prey step into a trap. So you initiated sexual contact with your supervisor in a remote location where she had no easy means of escape, or declining without creating uncomfortable professional dynamics. And you expect this court to believe she was an equal participant in this encounter? I expect the court to believe we're both adults capable of making our own decisions. What happened between us was mutual, consensual, and complicated in ways your questions are designed to ignore. The deposition continued for 2 more hours, circling the same territory from different angles, before Pierce finally released him with a warning that they'd likely need to reconvene for follow-up questions. Outside in the building's parking garage, Daniel leaned against his car and tried to stop shaking. Vega appeared beside him, her expression grim. "That was rough," she said, "but you did well. Stayed calm, didn't let him bait you into anger. He made me sound like a predator. He made you sound human, which is what we want. Juries understand human mistakes, human complications. What they don't understand is corporations that stalk employees and manufacture evidence." She squeezed his shoulder briefly. "Victoria's deposition is tomorrow. It's going to be worse for her. They'll attack her credibility, her character, her fitness as a mother. If you want to be there for support, I can arrange it. Can I be in the room?" "No, but you can wait outside. Let her know she's not alone." Daniel nodded, already dreading what Victoria would face, the way Pierce would twist her every decision into evidence of wrongdoing. But she'd stood beside him through this. The least he could do was return the favor. His phone rang as he drove home. Unknown number, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Harper, this is Ethan Ross." Daniel nearly drove off the road. He pulled over, heart pounding, and forced his voice steady. "What do you want?" "To talk. Off the record, person to person. There are things you should know before this goes any further. I have nothing to say to you. Even if I can prove Victoria's been lying to you, even if I can show you evidence that she's been manipulating this entire situation to her advantage." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles went white. "You're pathetic. Taking photographs through windows, following us to medical appointments, and now calling to spread more lies." "I'm trying to help you," Ethan said, and he actually sounded sincere. "You think Victoria quit to protect you? She quit because Marcus was about to expose her for embezzlement. She's been skimming client funds for 2 years, and when we discovered it, she needed a distraction. You were convenient." "You're lying." "Am I?" Ask yourself why she had so much savings available to fund this lawsuit. Ask yourself why she was so quick to resign rather than fight the termination. Ask yourself why Marcus was so determined to remove her from the firm. Ethan paused. "I have documentation, Daniel. Bank transfers, altered invoices, emails showing she was aware the numbers didn't match. I can send it to you. All I ask is that you look at it with an open mind. Send me nothing. Don't call me again. And if you contact me or Victoria one more time, I'm filing a restraining order." He ended the call, hands shaking with rage and something worse, doubt. Ethan was a proven liar. Everything he'd said could be fabrication designed to create division, to make Daniel question the one ally he had in this fight. But what if it wasn't? Daniel sat in his parked car, staring at his phone, trying to decide whether to tell Victoria about the call, whether to ask her directly if there was any truth to Ethan's accusations, whether doubt itself was already a betrayal of the trust they'd built. Finally, he started the car and drove home, the question sitting in his chest like a stone, heavy and cold and impossible to ignore. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed replaying Ethan's words, testing them for truth the way you'd test ice before stepping onto a frozen lake. Embezzlement, client funds, 2 years of deception. The accusations felt designed to exploit exactly the vulnerability they targeted, Daniel's fundamental uncertainty about how well he actually knew Victoria Lane. They'd spent a handful of weeks together, survived a blizzard, shared a crisis, built what felt like trust in the compressed timeline of mutual disaster. But did he really know her? Did he know what she was capable of when her back was against the wall? By morning, he'd made a decision. He would ask her directly, and he would trust her answer. Because doubt without confrontation was just poison working slowly. Victoria's deposition was scheduled for 9. Daniel arrived at the law offices at 8:30, settling into the waiting area with coffee that tasted like regret and a newspaper he couldn't focus on reading. Vega emerged briefly to acknowledge him with a nod before disappearing back into the conference room where Victoria was already being questioned. The hours crawled past. Daniel watched other people come and go, attorneys with briefcases, clients with desperate eyes, messengers delivering documents that probably decided fates. At noon, Vega came out looking exhausted. They're breaking for lunch. She's holding up, but it's brutal. Pierce is trying to establish that she has a history of inappropriate relationships with subordinates, that you're just the latest in a pattern. He's bringing up every mentorship she's had with junior staff, reframing professional guidance as grooming behavior. Daniel felt sick. That's insane. That's litigation. They're throwing everything at her, hoping something sticks. Vega glanced back toward the conference room. She asked if you were here. I think it would help if you stayed. I'm not going anywhere. Victoria emerged 10 minutes later, moving with the careful control of someone who'd been sitting still too long. She saw Daniel, and something in her expression cracked, relief bleeding through exhaustion. You stayed, she said. Where else would I be? They found a quiet corner in the building's lobby, away from the lawyers and the legal machinery grinding through their lives. Victoria bought a sandwich she didn't eat, just held it while staring at nothing. Ethan called me last night, Daniel said, because there was no good way to ease into it. Victoria's head snapped up. What did he say? That you embezzled client funds, that Marcus was going to expose you, that your resignation and this whole lawsuit is just a distraction from your own misconduct. Daniel watched her face carefully. He offered to send me documentation proving it. The silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. And you believed him. Victoria's voice was very quiet. I'm asking you, directly. Is there any truth to what he said? She set down the untouched sandwich, her hands moving to fold and refold the wrapper with mechanical precision. 3 years ago, I restructured how we handled client billing on the Riverside project. It was a massive development, $40 million budget, multiple funding sources, complex payment schedules. I consolidated several accounts to simplify tracking, moved money between funds to cover cash flow gaps while we waited for draws from the construction loan. Daniel's stomach dropped. It was legal, Victoria continued, her voice steady but strained. Every transfer was documented, approved by the client, reconciled in our quarterly reports. But the paper trail looked messy if you didn't understand the context. Marcus raised questions about it during a partner review. I explained the rationale. He accepted it. That was the end of it. Or he kept the questions in reserve, waiting for the right moment to weaponize them. Yes. Victoria met his eyes. If Ethan has documentation, it's the same documentation Marcus reviewed 3 years ago. Same transfers, same reconciliations, but presented without context to make it look like theft. It's not evidence of embezzlement, it's evidence of creative accounting presented dishonestly. Daniel wanted to believe her. Everything about her demeanor suggested truth. The weariness, the frustration, the resignation of someone who'd spent years building something legitimate only to watch it weaponized against her. But he'd learned the hard way that sincerity could be performed. Let me see the documents, he said. When Ethan sends them, let me review everything with our forensic accountant. Not because I don't trust you, because I need to know we're not walking into trial with a weakness we haven't prepared for. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Okay, but Daniel, if you're having doubts about me, about whether I'm trustworthy, maybe we should reconsider fighting together. I can't carry this lawsuit while also defending my credibility to you. I'm not doubting you. I'm being careful. There's a difference. Is there? She stood abruptly, gathering her things. Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like the moment things got hard, the moment they started attacking my character, you're already looking for reasons to believe the worst. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. Victoria's voice broke slightly. I'm sitting in there answering questions about every professional relationship I've ever had, every decision I've made, while they paint me as a predator who seduced her subordinate. I'm pregnant with your child while fighting to protect both our futures. And the person I thought was my partner in this is asking whether I'm secretly an embezzler. I'm asking because Ethan called me, because he's planting seeds of doubt, and I'm trying to handle them honestly instead of letting them fester. I thought you'd prefer directness. Victoria closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the anger had transmuted into something sadder and more honest. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm exhausted and scared and taking it out on you. She touched his arm briefly. Check the documentation when it comes. Do whatever you need to feel secure about this. I can't ask you to trust me blindly. They returned to the deposition in an uneasy truce, Victoria disappearing back into the conference room while Daniel resumed his vigil in the waiting area. The afternoon dragged on. At 4, Vega emerged with the news that they were done for the day, but would need to reconvene next week for follow-up. How bad was it? Daniel asked. She's tougher than they expected. Pierce tried every angle: inappropriate relationships, financial impropriety, using her pregnancy to manipulate sympathy. She didn't give him anything, but he got what he wanted on record, enough ambiguous statements he can twist in front of a jury. Vega's expression was grim. The embezzlement angle is new. If they're planning to introduce that at trial, we need to get ahead of it. Daniel nodded. I'm working on it. That evening, Daniel picked up Emma and took her for the promised dinner with Victoria. They met at a family restaurant near the apartment, the kind of place with crayons and paper placemats and chicken fingers on the kids' menu. Victoria arrived looking nervous in a way Daniel had never seen, checking her appearance in the restaurant window before entering. Emma spotted her immediately. Are you Victoria? I am. You must be Emma. Daddy says you're having a baby. Victoria smiled, genuine warmth breaking through the nervousness. That's right, in about 5 months. Can I feel it kick? Not yet. The baby's still too small, but when it gets bigger, absolutely. They settled into the booth, Emma monopolizing the conversation with the fearless enthusiasm of childhood. She asked Victoria about her favorite color, whether she liked dinosaurs, if she knew how to do cartwheels. Victoria answered each question with the same careful attention she probably gave to client presentations, and slowly Daniel watched both of them relax into something that felt almost natural. Daddy says you're helping him fight the bad people at his old job, Emma said around a mouthful of French fries. Emma, don't talk with your mouth full, Daniel corrected automatically. She swallowed, undeterred. But is it true? Victoria glanced at Daniel, silently asking permission for honesty. He nodded slightly. It's true, Victoria said. Your dad and I are working together to prove that some people did things that weren't right. It's hard, and it takes a long time, but we think it's important. Are you going to win? I hope so. But even if we don't, I think fighting for what's right is worth doing. Emma considered this seriously. Mrs. Patterson says losing doesn't make you a loser if you tried your best. Mrs. Patterson sounds very wise. She is. She's my teacher. Do you have kids? No, this baby will be my first. Are you scared? Victoria's smile turned softer, more vulnerable. Terrified. But I have people helping me, just like your dad has people helping him. We're figuring it out together. Emma nodded like this made perfect sense. When the baby comes, can I help? I'm really good at being gentle. Daniel felt something in his chest crack open at the simple offer, at his daughter already making space in her life for a sibling she'd never asked for. I would love that, Victoria said quietly. Thank you, Emma. After dinner, while Emma was in the bathroom, Victoria touched Daniel's hand across the table. She's wonderful. You've done an incredible job raising her. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together. That's what good parents feel like. The ones who think they have it all figured out are usually lying to themselves. Later, after dropping Emma at home and getting her ready for bed, Daniel sat in his kitchen checking email. Ethan had sent the promised documents, 40 pages of financial records, bank transfers, and email excerpts from the Riverside project. Daniel forwarded everything to Marcus Chen and to Vega's forensic accountant with a request for immediate analysis. The response came the next morning. Both Marcus and the accountant reached the same conclusion. The transfers were unusual but legal, creative accounting to manage cash flow on a complex project. Without the full context of client approvals and subsequent reconciliations, they could look suspicious. With that context, they were simply evidence of sophisticated financial management. Ethan's trying to create smoke without fire, Marcus Chen explained over the phone. He's counting on you not understanding construction finance well enough to recognize the difference. If Morrison tries to introduce this at trial, Vega can destroy it on cross-examination by presenting the full documentation. Daniel felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by guilt that he doubted Victoria at all. He texted her, "Reviewed the financial docs with our forensic team. They confirm everything you said. I'm sorry I questioned you." Her response came quickly. "Don't apologize for being careful, but thank you for trusting the evidence." The weeks that followed settled into a grinding rhythm of legal preparation. Depositions of former Morrison employees who testified about the firm's surveillance culture. Subpoenas of internal communications showing Marcus and Ethan coordinating the campaign against them. Discovery of the clinic's security footage showing a man matching Ethan's description signing in under a false name. Piece by piece, the case built itself. But so did the personal cost. Daniel's unemployment benefits ran out. Victoria's savings dwindled as legal fees mounted despite the anti-SLAPP fee award. They were both living on borrowed time and borrowed money, betting everything on a trial outcome that remained uncertain. Emma's school called one afternoon. She'd been in a fight. Another student had said her father was a pervert, and Emma had responded with fists. Daniel picked her up from the principal's office, her small face defiant and tear-streaked. "I'm sorry, Daddy, but he was lying about you." "I know, baby, but we don't hit people, even when they're wrong." "Then what do we do?" Daniel crouched to her level, this fierce, small person who carried his mistakes like armor. "We tell the truth. We stand up for what's right, and we trust that eventually people will see who we really are." "What if they don't?" "Then we keep being who we are anyway, because our character isn't determined by what other people believe about us. It's determined by the choices we make when things are hard." The trial date was set for late January, 3 weeks before Victoria's due date. Vega tried to request a continuance, but Morrison's attorneys opposed it, and Judge Chen denied the motion. They would go to trial pregnant, exhausted, and running on financial fumes. 2 days before jury selection, Daniel's phone rang at midnight. Victoria, her voice tight with pain. "I'm bleeding. The baby, something's wrong." He was in his car before she finished the sentence. Emma hastily deposited with Rachel with a shouted explanation. He reached Victoria's condo in 15 minutes, found her pale and shaking in the bathroom, and got her to Northwestern Memorial Hospital in another 10. The emergency room was chaos and fluorescent lights. A nurse took Victoria back immediately, while Daniel sat in the waiting area trying to remember how to breathe. This was his child too, this collection of cells that had become real through ultrasound images and growing evidence of Victoria's changing body. The thought of losing it felt like losing possibility itself. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, a doctor emerged, looking exhausted but not devastated. "Ms. Lane is stable. The baby's heartbeat is strong. She had what's called placental abruption, a partial separation of the placenta from the uterine wall. We've managed to stop the bleeding, but she'll need to remain on strict bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy. Any physical stress could trigger a complete abruption, which would be life-threatening for both her and the baby." Daniel felt the world tilt. Bed rest. For 3 weeks. With the trial starting in 2 days. I'm recommending she avoid all stressful activities. Court proceedings would qualify." The doctor's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I understand there are circumstances, but her health and the baby's health have to be the priority." Daniel went back to see Victoria in her hospital room. She was propped against pillows, monitors beeping softly, her face gray with exhaustion and fear. "I heard," she said before he could speak. "Bed rest. No trial." "The trial doesn't matter. You matter. The baby matters." "The trial is everything we've been fighting for. And it's worth nothing if you're dead." Daniel sat in the chair beside her bed, taking her hand. "We'll ask for a continuance. Judge Chen will have to grant it now. You have a medical emergency." "Morrison will fight it. They'll claim I'm faking, that this is a ploy to delay." "Let them. We have documentation, hospital records, a doctor's order. Even Judge Chen can't ignore that." Victoria closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm tired, Daniel. I'm so tired of fighting. Every time we get close to the end, something else goes wrong. The countersuit, the embezzlement accusations, now this. Maybe the universe is trying to tell us something." "What? That we should give up? That Morrison wins because you had a medical emergency? That maybe some battles aren't worth the cost?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm risking my baby's life to prove a point. What kind of mother does that make me? Daniel squeezed her hand, forcing her to look at him. You're not risking anything. You're going to go home, follow doctor's orders, and rest. The trial can wait. Justice can wait. Your health can't. And if Judge Chen denies the continuance, if Morrison demands we proceed on schedule, then I'll represent both of us. I'll sit in that courtroom and fight for us while you stay safe. You're not an attorney. No, but Vega is. And she can handle the legal strategy while I handle the testimony. I've already been deposed. I know our case inside and out. I can do this, Victoria. Let me carry this for you. She looked at him with something between gratitude and despair. You're supposed to be angry with me. I've destroyed your career, dragged you into an impossible lawsuit, gotten pregnant with your child, and now I can't even see it through to the end. You haven't destroyed anything. You've given me a reason to fight that matters more than any career, and you're not abandoning me. You're protecting our child. That's exactly what you should be doing. The continuance request was filed the next morning with Victoria's medical records attached. Morrison's attorneys objected exactly as predicted, claiming the timing was suspicious and suggesting Victoria had orchestrated the medical emergency to delay proceedings. Judge Chen reviewed the evidence and granted a 4-week continuance with visible reluctance, warning that no further delays would be tolerated barring catastrophic circumstances. Daniel moved into Victoria's guest room to help her maintain bed rest. He cooked meals she barely ate, monitored her vitals according to the doctor's instructions, and fielded calls from Vega about trial preparation. Emma came to visit most afternoons, reading her books to Victoria and chattering about school with the casual comfort of someone who'd decided Victoria was family, now regardless of what labels applied. One evening, while Emma was drawing pictures of the baby at Victoria's kitchen table, Victoria caught Daniel's hand as he passed. I never thanked you, she said quietly. For what? For not leaving, for staying when things got hard, for being exactly the kind of father I want raising our child. I'm terrified I'm going to fail both our kids. Fear means you care enough to try. That's more than a lot of people manage. She placed his hand on her belly, where the baby was starting to move with increasing frequency. Feel that? That's someone who's going to grow up knowing their father fought for what mattered, even when it was hard. The trial began on a Monday morning in late February, the courthouse steps slick with February slush. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table beside Vega, acutely aware of Victoria's absence. The jury, 7 women, 5 men, ranging in age from mid-20s to late 60s, watched him with expressions of calculation and judgment. Morrison and Associates brought their full legal team, Pierce leading with 4 associates arrayed behind him like artillery. Marcus Webb sat in the gallery, his presence a silent message that the firm took this threat seriously. Opening statements took the morning. Vega painted a picture of institutional abuse, surveillance state tactics, and retaliation against employees who threatened executive power. She showed the jury the photographs taken through cabin windows and in medical clinics, asked them to imagine how they'd feel being watched during private moments. Pierce countered with a narrative of policy violation and accountability, positioning Daniel as a subordinate who'd pursued his supervisor for career advancement and was now playing victim when consequences arrived. He showed emails Daniel had sent Victoria, reframed professional requests for guidance as manipulation, suggested the pregnancy was calculated strategy rather than accident. The trial proceeded in waves of testimony and cross-examination. Marcus Chen walked the jury through his forensic analysis of the photographs, establishing the connection to Ethan's device with technical precision. The clinic receptionist testified about the false ID and the man who'd signed in as Mark Stevens. Former Morrison employees described a culture of surveillance and intimidation. Daniel testified for 2 full days, answering Vega's careful questions about the retreat, the blizzard, the impossible choices made under desperate circumstances. Pierce's cross-examination was brutal, forcing Daniel to admit he'd initiated the sexual contact, to acknowledge the power differential, to concede he'd known involvement with Victoria violated policy. You knew the rules, didn't you, Mr. Harper? Yes. You knew Miss Lane could control your career? Yes. But you pursued her anyway? We pursued each other, in a situation where we both thought we might die. Context matters. Does it? Or is that just a convenient excuse for violating professional ethics? The days blurred together in a haze of legal procedure and emotional exhaustion. Daniel called Victoria every evening with updates, heard the strain in her voice as she navigated bed rest and fear that the baby might not survive to see the verdict. Emma stayed with Rachel most days, shielded from the courtroom circus but carrying the weight of her father's absence. The turning point came during Ethan Ross's testimony. Vega had saved him for late in the trial, and when he took the stand wearing expensive confidence and practiced innocence, she dismantled him with surgical precision. Mr. Ross, were you present at the Reynolds donor retreat in November? Yes. Which cabin were you assigned to? Cabin 7? And where was Cabin 7 in relation to the cabin where Mr. Harper and Miss Lane sheltered during the blizzard? Across the clearing, maybe 40 yards away. Did you take any photographs during the blizzard? I took some shots of the snow for social media. Vega pulled up his LinkedIn account on the courtroom display, showing the photos he'd posted. These photographs, taken with your iPhone 14 Pro, correct? I believe so, yes. And these photographs, she switched to the cabin photos of Daniel and Victoria, were also taken with an iPhone 14 Pro with the same sensor defect pattern, the same device. Ethan's confident expression cracked slightly. Lots of people have that phone. But you're the only person who was in Cabin 7 with direct line of sight to where Mr. Harper and Miss Lane were sheltering. You're the only person with both motive and opportunity to take these photographs. Vega advanced on him like a prosecutor scenting blood. You wanted Ms. Lane's partnership position, didn't you? That's not. You coordinated with Marcus Webb to create a scandal that would force her resignation and clear the path for your advancement. You photographed them during the blizzard. You followed them to medical appointments. You submitted those photographs to HR anonymously and then leaked them to the press. All calculated to destroy two people's lives for your professional benefit. No, I was trying to protect the firm. By stalking employees? By committing identity fraud at a medical clinic? By manufacturing a crisis that nearly killed a pregnant woman and her unborn child? Vega's voice was scalpel sharp. You're not a whistleblower, Mr. Ross. You're a predator who weaponized policy to eliminate competition. The jury's expression shifted, skepticism giving way to something harder and more judgmental. Pierce objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. Ethan left the stand looking diminished, his careful polish cracked to reveal the calculation underneath. Closing arguments came 3 weeks after the trial began. Vega spoke for 90 minutes, weaving together testimony and evidence into a narrative of institutional abuse and individual courage. She reminded the jury that breaking company policy didn't justify surveillance, that imperfect choices didn't warrant destruction, that accountability flowed both directions. My client isn't perfect, she said, gesturing toward Daniel. He made choices that violated policy. He complicated his professional life with personal involvement. But those imperfections don't excuse what Morrison and Associates did. They don't justify following someone to medical appointments. They don't make it acceptable to photograph people through cabin windows during a life-threatening emergency. And they certainly don't permit a corporation to destroy lives simply because those lives became inconvenient. Pierce's closing painted Daniel and Victoria as willing participants in their own downfall, people who'd violated clear rules and were now demanding sympathy for facing consequences. He reminded the jury that corporations needed structure, that policies existed for reasons, that sometimes uncomfortable decisions were necessary to maintain institutional integrity. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Daniel spent them in a fog of anxiety, calling Victoria every few hours, trying to sound confident while feeling anything but. Emma asked if they'd won yet, and he had to explain that justice sometimes moved slowly, that waiting was part of the process. On the 5th day, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Morrison and Associates had engaged in surveillance, stalking, retaliation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, compensatory damages, $2 million, punitive damages, $8 million. Plus, the firm was ordered to implement comprehensive reforms to surveillance policies, undergo independent ethics auditing for 5 years, and publicly acknowledge the misconduct. Daniel sat in the courtroom absorbing the numbers, barely able to process what they meant. $10 million. vindication. Proof that speaking up mattered, that fighting back wasn't futile, that sometimes the good guys actually won. Vega was crying, which she never did. The jury foreman, an older woman who'd sat through 3 weeks of testimony without visible reaction, nodded at Daniel as she left, a small gesture of acknowledgement that carried more weight than the verdict itself. Morrison's legal team filed immediate notice of appeal, but everyone in the courtroom knew it was performative. The verdict was too comprehensive, too carefully reasoned to overturn easily. They'd lost, and they'd lost publicly, and the damage to their reputation would take years to repair. Daniel called Victoria from the courthouse steps, reporters shouting questions he didn't hear. "We won," he said when she answered. "Victoria, we won." Her sob of relief carried through the phone like a prayer answered. "Tell me everything." He did, standing in February cold while cameras flashed and Vega fielded press questions. He told her about Ethan's testimony falling apart, about the jury's faces during closing arguments, about the moment the foreman read the verdict and the Morrison attorneys had visibly deflated. "I'm coming to get you," he said finally. "We're celebrating. Doctor's orders be damned." "Daniel, I can't. You don't have to walk. I'll carry you if necessary, but you're not missing this." He picked her up an hour later, carrying her to his car over her protests while Emma cheered from the back seat. They went to the same family restaurant where Emma and Victoria had first met, ordered champagne, Victoria couldn't drink, and sparkling cider she could, and toasted survival with people who felt increasingly like family. "What happens now?" Emma asked, chocolate milkshake mustache making her look even younger than 6. "Now we figure out what comes next," Daniel said. "Daddy needs to find a new job. Victoria needs to rest until the baby comes. We all need to remember what normal life feels like." "Is Victoria staying with us?" The question hung in the air, innocent and loaded simultaneously. Daniel and Victoria exchanged glances, a conversation happening in the space between words. "For a while," Victoria said carefully, "until I can take care of myself again. If that's okay with you." "It's okay. I like when you're there. The apartment feels less empty." 3 weeks later, Victoria went into labor at 2 in the morning. Daniel drove her to Northwestern Memorial with the controlled panic of someone who'd done this before, but found it no less terrifying the second time. Emma stayed with Rachel, who promised to bring her to the hospital as soon as visiting hours allowed. The labor was long and difficult, complications from the earlier abruption requiring careful monitoring. Daniel stayed the entire time, holding Victoria's hand through contractions, reminding her to breathe, being present in the way he'd learned from Emma's birth, that presence was sometimes all you could offer. Their daughter was born at 6:43 in the evening, small and perfect, and howling with the outrage of someone who'd been evicted from comfortable darkness. Victoria held her with the fierce protection of someone who'd almost lost her, and when she looked up at Daniel, her eyes were wet with tears she didn't bother hiding. "What should we name her?" she asked. They discussed options during the bed rest weeks, testing names like trying on clothes. Nothing had felt quite right, every choice carrying implications about whose family they were honoring, whose history they were acknowledging. Daniel looked at his daughter, their daughter, this small person who existed because 2 people had made imperfect choices under impossible circumstances and had somehow built something worth protecting. "Hope," he said. "Let's call her Hope." Emma arrived 2 hours later, tiptoeing into the hospital room with wide eyes and careful hands. She looked at her baby sister with the serious concentration she brought to everything important. "She's really small," Emma whispered. "You were too once," Daniel told her, "and Hope's going to need her big sister to teach her everything. How to be brave, how to fight for what's right, how to love people even when it's complicated." "I can do that." Emma touched Hope's tiny hand with one finger, and when the baby's fingers curled around hers, her smile could have lit the whole hospital. The settlement from Morrison and Associates was distributed 6 months later after legal fees and costs were deducted. Daniel received $800,000. Victoria received slightly more, compensation for her lost partnership and career destruction. It was enough to rebuild, to imagine futures that didn't involve constant financial panic. Daniel used his settlement to buy a small house in Oak Park, 3 bedrooms and a yard where Emma could play and Hope could eventually toddle. He started his own architecture firm, small and independent, focused on affordable housing and community projects that felt like using his skills for something that mattered. Victoria recovered slowly from the birth and the trial's emotional toll. She consulted on projects occasionally, offered her expertise to firms seeking her reputation despite the scandal, and slowly rebuilt a career on her own terms. She kept an office in Daniel's house, a space that belonged to her but existed in the context of the family they were accidentally building. They didn't get married. The question came up occasionally, usually from well-meaning friends who assumed that a baby meant wedding bells. But both of them had learned the hard way that legal contracts didn't guarantee love, and that sometimes the most important commitments were the ones you chose to honor every day without paperwork. Instead, they figured it out as they went. Daniel and Emma in one house, Victoria splitting time between her condo and theirs, Hope moving between spaces with the easy adaptability of someone who'd never known a world where love came in only one configuration. It was messy and complicated, and nothing like the life either of them had planned. But watching Emma teach Hope to color inside the lines, watching Victoria read bedtime stories in voices that made both girls laugh, watching the slow accumulation of shared meals and inside jokes in ordinary moments, Daniel thought maybe this was better than any plan could have been. One evening in late autumn, nearly 2 years after the trial, Daniel stood on the porch of his Oak Park house watching Emma and Hope play in the yard. Victoria emerged with 2 glasses of wine, handing him one. "Emma wants to be an architect," she said. "She told me today. Said she wants to design houses where families can be happy. She's 7. Next week she'll want to be a veterinarian or an astronaut. Maybe. But she's learning the right lessons, that you fight for what matters, that you protect the people you love, that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the best outcomes." Daniel looked at her. This woman who'd walked away from everything secure to protect someone she barely knew, who'd risked her life to bring their daughter into the world, who'd rebuilt her career from ashes with the same determination she brought to everything. "We did okay, didn't we?" he asked. "Better than okay. We survived. We protected our kids. We proved that speaking truth to power actually matters sometimes." She leaned against him, comfortable in the proximity they'd built through thousands of small moments. "And we're still standing." In the yard, Emma was teaching Hope to identify clouds, pointing at the sky and inventing stories about what each shape represented. Hope listened with the rapt attention of someone who believed her big sister knew everything worth knowing. Daniel thought about the pregnancy test that had started all of this, the small sound against a kitchen counter that had changed everything. He thought about choices made in blizzards and conference rooms and hospital waiting rooms, about the architecture of accidental families and the strength required to build them. No speeches, no dramatic revelations, just the slow, steady work of showing up, of choosing each other repeatedly, of protecting the people who depended on you even when it cost everything. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of possibility. There would be challenges, co-parenting complications, career uncertainties, the lingering shadows of the scandal they'd survived. But watching his daughters play while the woman who'd fought beside him stood at his shoulder, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not certainty, not security, but hope. The kind you built one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage layered on another, until it became strong enough to hold the weight of an imperfect, beautiful, hard-won life. Emma called out asking him to come see the dragon she'd found in the clouds. Hope echoed her with nonsense syllables that approximated her sister's enthusiasm. Victoria squeezed his hand once before releasing it, sending him toward his daughters with a smile that said she'd still be there when he returned. Daniel walked across the yard to where his girls waited, toward the life he'd never planned but had fought to protect, and thought about how the bravest thing he'd ever done was refuse to walk away when walking away would have been easier. Sometimes you won by standing still, by planting your feet and saying no to people who thought power meant they could do whatever they wanted, by believing that truth mattered, that justice was worth pursuing, that the cost of fighting was less than the cost of surrender. The clouds shifted overhead, dragons becoming castles, becoming possibilities. Emma's hand found his, Hope babbling contentedly in Victoria's arms as she joined them. And in that moment, standing in autumn sunlight with the family he'd accidentally built, Daniel understood what victory actually looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and hard-won, and absolutely worth everything it had cost to get there.